Alaric Stark was not yet a legend when the whispers began spreading through the stone corridors of Winterfell. He was the sixth son of Lord Cregan Stark, a boy of lean build and keen mind, largely overlooked by the world outside the grey walls and snowy courtyards of the north. But from a young age, Alaric seemed older than he had any right to be. He had a quietness about him that unnerved his brothers and sisters, an intensity that sometimes worried his lord father, and an unusual bond with the dire wolves that roamed beyond the Winterfell godwood. Though the pups never took to his siblings as well as they did to him, nobody was overly surprised. The Starks were wolf-blooded, all men knew that, and dire wolves were said to sense that kindred spirit. It was but one more silent sign that Alaric was destined for something beyond the ordinary. Yet no one, least of all Alaric, suspected that his fate would be entwined with the great beasts of fire and sky. It began with the storms. A relentless, howling winter descended on the north, the harshness so potent that the old men in the Frostfangs called it an omen. For half a year, snow choked the King's Road and travelers found themselves assailed by ice-laden winds, forced to huddle in friendly halls or risk perishing on the roadside. Ravens carried word of unsettling incidents along the wall. The Rangers, they said, were returning in pieces if they returned at all. Strange shapes stalked the forests north of the Gift, and there were accounts of a pallid glow moving in the distance at night. Even the sun felt weak and anemic during the short daytime hours. Against the backdrop of dread, rumors continued to brew, swirling like dust motes in the still air of the Winterfell library. Alaric spent many days in that library, culling any scrap of knowledge about the Age of Heroes and the wonders and horrors that supposedly lurked in the old days. He was no maester, but the intricacies of runic texts and dusty parchments appealed to him more than the sword work his older brothers reveled in. Such interests had earned him the mild derision of his siblings who saw his inclinations as weakness. But Alaric possessed a quiet determination. Stories of Bran the Builder, of the Night's King, of the Children of the Forest were not just tales to him. He studied them, memorized them. And somewhere amid all those brittle, yellowed parchments he found a hint of something altogether more fantastic, a story dismissed by maesters as wild rumor that once, in the earliest days of man's arrival on Westeros, dragons might have roamed farther north than anyone believed. The possibility was enthralling. Dragons were thought to be creatures of heat and deserts, unsuited for the cold. Yet scribbled notes in a half-destroyed manuscript mentioned a hidden valley beyond the mountains west of the New Gift where heat rose from the ground and might have sheltered scaled creatures in ages past. No one took such a notion seriously. The Targaryens had not yet even come into being during the Age of Heroes, so official records held. Dragons were the province of the Valyrians far across the sea and millennia later. Moreover, if some lost breed of dragon had ever taken roost in the north, it surely died out. Alaric tried to dismiss his fascination. Yet every time he rode out into Winterfell's courtyard or wandered the quiet gloom of the godwood, he found his thoughts slipping back to that notion of winged serpents coiled in hidden places. Especially in the bleakness of that extended winter, the thought of fire-breathing creatures was irresistible. It called to him even in his dreams. When the storms began to subside, an uncanny thaw arrived. The temperature rose so quickly that the ground melted into slush. Alaric found himself wandering out into the courtyard more often to stare at the sky. And then one night, deep beneath the flickering torches of Winterfell's great hall, in the presence of several older lords come to consult with Lord Cregan, he overheard scraps of conversation. Talk of a burned clearing near the White Knife. Of wildlings who had come crashing, half-crazed, over the wall, babbling about monstrous shapes in the dark. The older lords scoffed, but Alaric caught the tremor in his father's voice. Something unsettled Cregan Stark deeply. Alaric wanted to ask, but his father's cold eyes warned him away. Some secrets were not meant for a child of 13 name days. But Alaric was no ordinary child, and the more people dismissed him, the more resolute he became. His chance to pursue the truth came weeks later when riders from the Night's Watch arrived with tidings from Castle Black. Their leader, Ser Jorah Holt, stayed at Winterfell to speak privately with Lord Cregan about escalating incidents along the ranges north of the wall. Alaric approached Ser Jorah in the corridor after overhearing the word fire amid the hush talk. With a respectful bow, Alaric asked if the rumors were true. Were there signs of strange scorching out there in the deep wilderness, as though some new threat roamed? The knight gave him a stern look but eventually acknowledged that some rangers had seen gouts of flame in the sky and discovered charred carcasses of elk in the haunted forest. "Mind your studies, young Stark," Ser Jorah said. "This is no matter for a boy." That dismissal hardened Alaric's resolve. With the help of a trusted friend, A tall, spindly stable boy named Desmond who worshipped the ground Alaric walked on for reasons Alaric could never fully fathom. He prepared discreetly. He loaded a stout mare with supplies enough for a month's travel, borrowed furs from the armory, and studied maps of the area just west of the new gift, searching for the rumored valley. If indeed there was some volcanic or geothermal place, it might generate enough warmth to harbor something. When the next thaw came, Alaric slipped away from Winterfell under cover of darkness. Desmond left with him, too devoted to be deterred by fear or doubt. Together, they rode north. Their journey to the wall was arduous but not impossible. They managed to skirt the more guarded routes by telling any who challenged them that they were on a mission for Lord Cregan, delivering messages for the Night's Watch. Desmond had a knack for bluffing, and Alaric exuded a self-assuredness that few questioned. They reached Castle Black in time to see the gates open for a convoy of supply wagons. Under the confusion, they slipped beyond, crossing through to the land of eternal winter. The air was different there, sharper, as though imbued with ancient primal power. For 3 days, they traveled westward, hugging the foothills. At times, they heard distant howls. Twice, they saw fresh trails of footprints, bare footprints, though not a living soul in sight. Desmond's face grew more and more pale. Alaric pressed on. The nights were harsh, but the old, half-rotted records had given Alaric a clue. They sought the Warm Vale, a hidden region rumored to be fed by geothermal vents. On the 4th day, the wind shifted and carried a strange sulfuric odor. Desmond's horse shied away. Alaric's heart pounded. Following the stench, they found a winding ravine that led deep into a cleft in the mountains. The snow grew thinner on the ground and they could see steam rising from cracks in the earth. Desmond muttered a prayer to the old gods. Alaric gripped his reins tightly. If the old accounts were correct, this might indeed be the place. They followed the ravine, descending into an unexpected pocket of warmth. The deeper they went, the higher the temperature rose until they could no longer see their breath in the air. Vines clung to rocks, a thin forest of gnarled black pines grew along the banks of a winding stream. The water gushed hot and foul-smelling from some subterranean source. It was surreal to come upon such living greenness in the midst of the frozen north. But even more astonishing was the presence of large claw marks etched into the bark of nearby pines. Alaric paused to study them. They were too broad and too deep for any bear he knew. Something else had done this. On the 5th night, they made camp in a small grotto behind a cluster of rocks. By then, Desmond could barely keep from trembling, though the air was mild enough to leave them sweating under their furs. "It's mad to go on, Alaric," he muttered. "What if it's some demon we chase, not a dragon?" But Alaric's excitement was unstoppable. If dragons truly lived here, even a single one, it might change everything for House Stark, for the entire north. With the others stirring, or at least rumors of them, what better shield than a beast of flame? Their caution paid off. Near dawn, just as the sky began to lighten, Alaric heard a rumbling roar echo through the vale. It sounded like an avalanche, except it was alive. Both boys scrambled onto an outcrop of rock in time to see a massive shape gliding overhead. Leathery wings stretched wide as a barn, scales glimmering a dull gray in the faint light. The creature's tail lashed the air, and a trail of heat shimmer followed in its wake. Alaric's breath caught in his throat. Even his imagination hadn't prepared him for the reality of a dragon. Long neck, wedge-shaped head, jaws bristling with fangs that could likely snap a horse in two. It soared over the trees, circled once, and vanished beyond the ridgeline with an ease that belied its tremendous size. Desmond nearly fainted. Alaric had to help him sit down, heart hammering. But behind the terror, excitement coursed through him. There was a dragon in the north. The old stories weren't just tales. Now came the question, how could it be approached, let alone tamed? They spent the next few days hiding in the underbrush, glimpsing the creature from time to time. They found a cavern system high along the valley's eastern edge that smelled of sulfur and brimstone. Warm air gusted out of cracks in the stone, and near the cave mouth lay bones, great heaps of gnawed elk bones, mammoth tusks, the remains of dire wolves. The dragon hunted widely, apparently, and left its kills near the entrance. Sometimes Alaric saw fleeting movements deeper inside. On the 2nd afternoon, while the sun pierced the ravine, he dared venture near enough to study footprints. They were enormous, four-toed, with deep gouges from the talons. Each step formed a crater in the soft earth. The presence of a single such beast was overwhelming. A part of Alaric wondered if there could be others. But for now, seeing even one was a marvel. He began to watch for patterns. Each dawn or dusk, the dragon soared off to hunt. By midday, it often returned with some large kill clutched in its claws. Then it would retire to the depths of the cave. It breathed bursts of flame to sear flesh from bones before feasting. Smoke trickled from the cavern mouth. Once sated, it slumbered. Alaric supposed the creature was no younger than a few centuries if legends were correct, for it was massive. Yet it moved with a savage grace. The more he observed, the stronger his conviction became. The North needed that dragon's might. In the stories of Valyria, men had used sorcery, whips, horns, and binding rituals to claim dominion over dragons. The Targaryens, centuries in the future, would do something similar with dragon eggs. But Alaric had no such implements, only wits and daring. He did recall certain lines from the oldest texts, references to a bond between man and dragon that could be born of respect, cunning, and an exchange of gifts. Could he replicate such a feat? It was madness. But the memory of those rumors from the wall, the pale shapes in the woods, spurred him on. The North faced a threat too terrible to fight with steel alone. He began by leaving offerings at the mouth of the cavern. Hunting was not easy in the warm vale, but they managed to snare a few smaller animals, hares, a lone boar that Desmond speared, nearly getting himself gored in the process. Alaric placed these kills near the dragon's feeding ground. He doubted the creature needed such paltry offerings, yet perhaps it would recognize the intent. Twice they watched from a safe distance as the dragon sniffed the kills, breathed a short gout of flame, and devoured them in one gulp. Then it shook its head as if uncertain what to make of them and lumbered back inside. Alaric persevered. He remembered that dragons were said to have keen intelligence, if not in the manner of men. He hoped to convey that he meant no harm. Every morning he would approach within a stone's throw of the cave mouth, lay down a fresh carcass, then back away slowly, bowing his head. Desmond thought him mad and kept watch from behind a large boulder, ready to run at the first sign of trouble. But the dragon, though it roared and snorted, did not immolate Alaric. Its eyes were a molten gold color, flecked with black, and they glinted with curiosity. Now and then its huge head snaked out to peer at him. The intensity of that gaze nearly paralyzed Alaric each time. After a week of this ritual, Alaric decided to push his luck further. One evening he approached and spoke in a calm, steady voice. The words mattered less than the tone, or so the texts had implied. Softly he repeated a handful of phrases about the old gods, about warmth in the heart of ice, about partnership. Desmond hid behind that same boulder, so frightened he could hardly breathe. The dragon sniffed the air, a puff of smoke escaping its nostrils. Alaric kept talking, voice steady. When the dragon rumbled a growl, Alaric stopped and took a slow step back. The beast swung its serpentine neck forward. For a heartbeat, Alaric expected to be fried where he stood, but the dragon only snorted hot breath across him. The wave of heat shimmered and left his skin prickling. Then it withdrew again, as though unimpressed, but not hostile. No step forward came without misstep. A few days later, Desmond, emboldened by Alaric's improbable success, tried to approach with him. The dragon reacted with immediate aggression, baring fangs and belching a stream of flame that torched a stand of brush. They both fled, choking on smoke. The message was clear: it tolerated Alaric in a limited capacity, but Desmond's presence was unwelcome. From that day on, Alaric made his attempts alone. As the weeks wore on, he dared to linger closer and closer. Twice he laid a hand on the ground just a few feet from where the dragon's foreclaws rested. He marveled at the scales, each the size of a man's palm, gray with hints of silver in the sunlight. Warm drafts emanated from the creature's body, as though it were a living furnace. Eventually, Alaric was able to stand within arm's reach and remain unscorched, though he never tried touching it. The stories he had read were vague, but he knew better than to assume taming a dragon was as simple as petting a horse. Any wrong move could cost him his life. Still, an understanding had been reached, or so it seemed. The dragon's eyes followed him now, not with immediate menace but with a curious spark. He felt certain it recognized him as the same presence day after day. Meanwhile, supplies ran low. Desmond grew frantic about the possibility of returning to Winterfell. They had already been away for nearly a month. So Alaric made the difficult decision. Desmond would take one of the horses, half their remaining provisions, and ride back. He would return with reinforcements if possible, or at least more food. Desmond resisted at first, fearing for Alaric's safety, but Alaric insisted. He could not leave until he either forged a bond with the dragon or knew beyond doubt it was impossible. Reluctantly, Desmond left, promising to return in 2 weeks. The solitude weighed on Alaric. With only a single horse, plus the occasional glimpses of ravens overhead, he felt the isolation acutely. Winter's chill hovered at the edges of the warm vale, and he often feared some other threat might creep in: wildlings, wights, or worse. Nights were the hardest, spent huddled in a shallow cave with only meager firelight. He dreamed of that monstrous head leaning down, jaws wide, every night. But every dawn he steeled himself and ventured to the dragon's lair again, continuing his offerings and quiet attempts to communicate. Little by little, the creature let him come closer, let him speak in that calm, measured cadence. One morning, it happened. Alaric approached the cave mouth with no offering. He'd run out of anything suitable, and the dragon came forward to greet him anyway. It lowered its head so that its jaw nearly touched the ground. Thick columns of breath drifted from its nostrils. Alaric's knees almost buckled, but he kept them locked, his heartbeat wild. With infinite caution, he stepped forward and raised a hand, meeting the dragon's gaze. Its eyes were gold fire in the dimness. He let his palm hover inches away from the tip of its muzzle, waiting for permission. At length, the creature emitted a low rumble that vibrated Alaric's bones. Then, as though conceding, the dragon nudged him. A wave of heat and the rough texture of scales greeted Alaric's trembling fingers. In that instant, an overwhelming sense of awe consumed him. It was as if the entire north melted away, leaving only him and this ancient being. He inhaled the sulfuric odor of its breath, coughed, and pressed his hand more firmly against the dragon's muzzle. Its eyelids lowered in something like acceptance. Then, after a moment, it lifted its head, and Alaric jerked back, terrified the moment of peace would erupt into flame. But no. The dragon instead let out a resonant, echoing call that seemed to pierce the valley walls. Alaric had to cover his ears. When it finished, the beast turned and lumbered deeper into the cave. Alaric stood there for a long moment, too stunned to move. He spent the rest of that day in a daze. Something had changed between them. But taming a dragon in full was another matter. If the legends of the Valyrians told true, men who flew dragons had strong wills, forged a bond that went beyond the physical. They rode them with saddles of steel and horns that rang with magic. Alaric had none of these. He only had determination and a faint spark of something in his heart that the dragon seemed to acknowledge. Perhaps that was enough. By the time Desmond returned, exhausted and accompanied by two of Winterfell's best huntsmen, Alaric had managed to coax the dragon to let him stand close enough to examine its immense flanks. The huntsmen were initially horrified at the sight of the winged monster crouched near the cave, but Alaric managed to calm them. Even so, they refused to approach, calling Alaric a sorcerer under their breath. They had brought more supplies, though, which allowed him to remain there longer. Alaric also learned that Lord Cregan was furious about his disappearance. But equally important, a new wave of terror was whispered. A pair of rangers at Eastwatch by the Sea had reported seeing figures with glowing blue eyes, resurrecting corpses of animals in the frozen wastes. War, it seemed, was inevitable. Still, Alaric refused to leave. Not yet. He told the huntsmen they could return if they wished. He would not blame them. Desmond, forever loyal, remained. The huntsmen stayed, if only to keep watch over the boy they feared might be half insane. That evening, while the huntsmen set up a proper camp, Alaric prepared himself for the next step, somehow convincing the dragon to bear him. The notion was almost laughable. He had no saddle. He had never even ridden a true warhorse, let alone a beast so large it could crush entire caravans. Yet the stories said that men had once done the impossible. He was a Stark, after all, of the blood of the first men. Maybe that counted for something in the eyes of an ancient creature. Before dawn, he approached the dragon's lair, carefully draping his furs across one shoulder, leaving his arms free. The beast crawled out, blinking in the pre-dawn gloom, sparks drifting from its nostrils. Alaric placed a hand against its muzzle in greeting. The dragon lowered its head, rumbled softly. Alaric's pulse pounded. Step by step, he walked alongside its flank, letting it see him, smell him. Even in the gloom, he could make out the sheen of its scales, the ridges that ran down its back, the thick wings folded against its sides. He reached up, pressed his hand where the wing joined the body. The flesh twitched. The dragon inhaled sharply but did not snap or burn him. Encouraged, Alaric slid his hands over the plates of scales until he found a precarious foothold near the creature's shoulder. He tested his weight. The dragon tensed and shifted, nearly throwing him off. Alaric backed away, heart hammering. This might take countless attempts, if it were even possible at all. Another day passed. The huntsman urged Alaric to abandon this madness, but he did not waver. He resumed the attempt each morning and evening, coaxing the dragon with murmured reassurances and gentle touches. The beast responded with a mixture of curiosity and annoyance. A few times, it roared and stomped, sending rock slides clattering down the valley walls. But it never attacked him. Each time, Alaric withdrew calmly, only to return again. After a week, he managed to climb halfway onto its back before it shook him off. He tumbled to the ground, bruised and aching. Desmond rushed forward, pleading with him to stop. Alaric refused. On the next attempt, he clung more firmly, pressing his cheek against those great scales, trying to exude calm. The dragon growled, shifting its weight, but it did not fling him aside. In a trembling voice, Alaric crooned to it the half-forgotten lullabies of the old gods. Nonsense words that his wet nurse had once whispered to him. Slowly, the dragon settled. Desmond and the huntsman watched in disbelief as Alaric Stark sat astride the creature's back, draped in furs, hands trembling over the ridges. The sunrise caught the silver edges of the dragon's scales, reflecting golden light. Alaric felt as if he stood on the brink of a dream. He dared not move too suddenly. For a long moment, the dragon was still, aside from the slow rise and fall of its breathing. Then, in a sudden whoosh, it flared its wings. A gust of air blew Alaric's hair back. He tightened his grip, hardly believing what was happening. The beast snarled, twisted its neck, and sprang upward. That first flight was a frantic, lurching affair. Alaric clung for dear life as the dragon soared over the vale, weaving between cliffs. The ground fell away beneath them, and his stomach lurched. The huntsmen shouted from far below, their voices swallowed by the thunder of wings. At any moment, Alaric expected to be thrown off and dashed against the rocks. But somehow he stayed on. The experience was intoxicating, terror and exultation melding into one. The roar of wind filled his ears and he could feel the heat radiating from the dragon's body. He pressed himself closer, letting instinct take over. Whether it was the beast's own caution or some flicker of acceptance, it did not pitch him off. It carried him in erratic loops around the warm vale, then swooped back to the cavern mouth, landing with a heavy crash that nearly unseated him. He slid down its shoulder to the ground, his legs weak as water. He hardly slept that night, heart brimming with adrenaline. But in the morning he tried again. Each attempt brought slightly more cooperation from the dragon, slightly greater control for Alaric. One day he managed to guide it with subtle shifts of weight and pressure of his hands. It was not entirely a language, rather an intuitive dance between man and beast. The huntsman looked on, half convinced they were witnessing sorcery. Desmond sometimes prayed aloud. But Alaric could feel the connection forming, a near-mythic bond. Finally, after many attempts, he felt confident enough to fly beyond the veil. Early one dawn, he strapped on extra furs, packed a light satchel of provisions, and climbed onto the dragon's back. The huntsman pled with him to reconsider. The dragon, for all its tolerance, remained an unpredictable creature. One slip in the open sky could end in death. But Alaric had come too far to stop. He spoke softly into the dragon's ear slit. A sense of tension coursed through its muscles. Then it snapped its wings wide, pounced forward, and leapt into the open air. An exhilarating rush flooded Alaric as they soared over the ridgeline. The frosty expanse of the true north opened before them, tinged pink by the sunrise. In the distance rose the wall, a stark slash of white against the horizon. Alaric guided the dragon south. The air grew colder at altitude, but he felt the beast's warmth seeping into his bones. They flew over endless stretches of snow-laden forests. Once, Alaric glimpsed a group of wildlings gazing skyward in terror. He circled around, feeling both pride and awe. Then he aimed further south, and the edges of the gift came into view. The patchy farmland, dusted with snow, looked impossibly small from high above. He could not resist the urge to sweep lower, gliding just over treetop level. The dragon gave a triumphant roar that echoed for miles. Birds scattered in panic. Alaric realized that, in all likelihood, he was making history. No living man had flown a dragon in the north for thousands of years, if ever. He did not travel as far as Winterfell on that first flight, unsure if he could handle the distance. Instead, he turned back after an hour of soaring. Upon returning to the warm vale, he found Desmond and the huntsman waiting anxiously. Their fear and astonishment upon witnessing his safe return was palpable. He shared with them the euphoria, though in truth, words could not fully capture it. He had bridged the gap between man and legend. He had tamed a dragon, even if that word felt too small for the reality of their fragile partnership. It was a bond of mutual respect, forged in caution and acceptance. But Alaric's ambitions burned hotter than that. He did not undertake this feat simply for personal glory. The North was under threat. If the stories of the others were true, if unnatural frost creatures walked again, how else could they be stopped? The tales from the long night said that dragonfire had once been a bane to the forces of ice. If so, Alaric had found the best possible weapon for the battles to come. And if it was to be used, he needed to bring it to Winterfell to prove to Lord Cregan and all the North that hope yet lived in the form of fire and scale. He set about preparing for a grand flight home. Desmond and the huntsmen helped gather more game from the forest so the dragon would not be famished on arrival. Alaric fashioned a makeshift harness from leather straps to secure him more firmly in place. The day before they departed, he spoke to the huntsmen and commanded them to ride ahead as swiftly as they could to carry word that Alaric Stark returned with something beyond imagining. "Clear the courtyard," he said. "I don't want bloodshed if my friend lands amidst men armed with spears." The huntsmen departed at dawn, their expressions torn between relief at escaping that cursed veil and disbelief at the news they carried. Alaric gave them a good head start, then took flight with Desmond riding pillion, Desmond who was terrified out of his mind but clung nonetheless, trusting his young lord. The dragon gave a low rumble of protest at the added weight, but after some coaxing from Alaric it accepted the arrangement. They soared from the warm vale into the crisp morning sky. The journey south was a test of endurance. The beast's powerful wings churned the air, leaving swirling currents behind them. Alaric guided it, angled to catch rising drafts. The land slipped by below, swathes of pine forest, rolling hills, frozen lakes. It was wondrous and surreal. Whenever fear struck him, he looked at the broad neck beneath his hands, at the living furnace that carried him, and felt a surge of resolve. The old gods must be with him, for no mortal man did this lightly. They approached Winterfell from the north, just as the huntsmen had arranged. Even from afar, Alaric saw the commotion along the battlements, small figures rushing about, horns blowing, the portcullis rising and falling. As they drew closer, he could make out archers lining the walls, though none loosed an arrow. The huntsmen must have reached them in time. He prayed that no one would lose their nerve and shoot. The dragon descended in a broad spiral over the fields outside Winterfell. Snow billowed in swirling drifts beneath its wings. As they neared the courtyard, Alaric signaled for it to land gently, though such a massive creature could hardly help but shake the earth when it alighted. It was a tumult. Men scrambled back, shouting in fear or amazement. Horses whinnied and reared. Desmond slid off, stumbling away to catch his breath. Alaric remained astride a moment longer, letting everyone see that he was in control, that this was no wild beast come to devour them. Then carefully he dismounted and placed a hand on the dragon's flank. Murmurs and gasps rippled through the courtyard. Lords and knights pressed forward, swords half-drawn in trembling hands. And then Lord Cregan Stark himself strode out from behind a line of guards, face pale as the snows but set in grim determination. Alaric bowed his head, stepping away from the dragon. "Father," he said, voice ringing in the hush that fell over the yard. "I have returned with an ally." Cregan took in the monstrous shape, the steam rising from its nostrils, the ridges of its back. He was a hardened man, yet even he could not hide the awe and fear etched into his stern features. For a long moment neither spoke. Then, in a voice that trembled only slightly, Cregan said, "You vanish for moons, chase a rumor into the wilds beyond the wall, and you bring back this? Have you bargained with a demon, boy?" Alaric felt his heartbeat quicken. "No demon, father. A living dragon." He gestured at the creature's scaled hide. "It dwells in a hidden vale, kept warm by the earth. I have earned its trust. It is ours if we treat it with respect. With its fire, we can stand against any threat that comes from the north." Cregan's gaze swept from Alaric to the dragon and back. "You are either the bravest fool the north has ever seen, or the luckiest. But if half the rumors from the Night's Watch are true, then we will need every edge we can muster." His voice was hoarse as he said it. "I never thought to see such a thing, especially not in our lifetimes." Alaric nodded, stepping forward. He could feel the tension in the air, see the guards gripping spears and swords. "We must not provoke it," he cautioned. "It's temperamental." An understatement if ever there was one. The dragon shifted its weight, its massive tail sweeping the cobblestones. Several men flinched and backed away. Alaric turned and placed a calming hand on the beast's flank, murmuring softly. The effect was immediate. The dragon settled, eyes blinking slowly. A wave of relief passed through the crowd. In the days that followed, Winterfell was thrown into turmoil. Some elders condemned the dragon as an abomination, claiming the North should rely only on steel and the old gods. Others argued that, in the face of rising evils, a living furnace of scales was a gift that must be welcomed. Lord Cregan convened his council of bannermen, forcing them to behold Alaric's mount firsthand. Few dared remain in close proximity. Yet fear yielded grudging respect, and eventually many recognized the value in having such a creature. The threat from beyond the wall loomed too large to ignore. Fewer rangers returned from patrol, sightings of whites multiplied. Tension mounted across the north. Word spread through the small folk that Winterfell now harbored a living dragon, and though the tales grew ever more fantastical with each retelling, the effect was to fortify the morale of the populace. Perhaps the old gods had not abandoned them. Alaric found himself thrust into a position of unexpected prominence. Though still a youth, he alone could communicate with and ride the beast. Lords who once ignored him now sought his insight. Knights asked him if the dragon's fire could melt entire armies of whites. Was it immune to cold magic? Could it speak in some arcane manner? Alaric answered as best he could, though in truth he was still learning. The bond between them was tenuous, built on trust and routine. He spent hours each day caring for the dragon, bringing it hunted game, letting it stretch its wings in the wide fields outside Winterfell. The city's walls were too confining for flight, and he dared not push his luck by forcing it to remain perched on a tower. He was in the midst of a feeding session one dusk when a horn blast echoed from the northern walls. The watchers on the ramparts shouted warnings. Through the open gates, Alaric could see riders approaching at speed, black-clad men from the Night's Watch. They arrived in a swirl of hooves and freezing breath. One ranger half fell from his saddle, his face chalk-white. "They've come," he gasped, eyes wide as a maddened horse. "The others. They're massing an army of corpses north of the wall. Eastwatch has fallen. We barely escaped with our lives." Those words sent a chill through Winterfell deeper than any wind. Lord Cregan wasted no time, convening a war council that very night. Ravens flew out to gather the bannermen and to warn the lords of the other regions if they would listen. But Alaric knew the burden was now heavy on his shoulders. The others were no myth, no children's tale. They were here, and they brought cold death. Swords of steel could kill whites, but the White Walkers themselves were another matter entirely. Few living men had faced them and survived. Dragon fire, on the other hand, was said to be a mortal threat to their kind. Alaric spoke up in the council. "Let me go forth on Dragonback," he said, voice resolute. "I can bring fire to the enemy before they breach the wall's remains. Perhaps drive them back." An uproar ensued. Some lords decried the risk. "You are too young, too untested," they said. Others insisted that if Alaric could destroy the threat, better to strike early. Cregan pressed his lips together in tension. "If we lose you, we lose our greatest weapon. Yet if we do nothing, the others may overrun us," he said heavily, turning to his son. "If you go, I cannot protect you." Alaric's expression was grim but determined. "I have flown the north skies. Let me show them what fire can do. My life is my own to risk, better mine than thousands of innocents if the others descend upon our keeps." The final decision was made before dawn. Alaric would lead a small vanguard force to the wall where they would coordinate with any remaining Night's Watch brothers. Then, from the air, he would scout the enemy's location and, if possible, unleash flame upon them. Lord Cregan would rally the bannermen to prepare a larger stand at the choke points south of the wall. When the first light of day broke over Winterfell's towers, Alaric mounted the dragon in the yard. A hush fell across the assembled soldiers. Some crossed themselves or prayed to the old gods as the beast extended its wings, the air shimmering around it. Alaric felt only the pounding of his heart. With a leap, the dragon surged into the sky, carrying him northward. The vanguard force rode below, smaller than a typical army, but they traveled swiftly. Alaric soared overhead, scanning the horizon, a solitary sentinel in the cold morning light. They reached the wall in 2 days. The sight that greeted them was ominous. Eastwatch was indeed wrecked, its gates splintered and blackened as if by some unnatural frost. The few surviving rangers, haggard and wounded, had retreated westward, trying to regroup at Castle Black. Alaric led the dragon on a sweeping pass over the shattered fortress. Frozen corpses littered the grounds. No movement. The stench of death permeated the air, though the temperature was so cold it nearly froze Alaric's nostrils. Further reconnaissance revealed that the others had left the immediate area, presumably marching inland. Tracks of skeletal footprints and shards of ice led away, disappearing into the thick forest. Alaric circled back, signaled to the vanguard that Eastwatch was deserted. They advanced carefully, searching for survivors, finding none. A chill dread sank into Alaric's bones as he descended for a brief landing among the broken ramparts. The dragon's presence melted patches of ice. Night's Watch men told him that thousands of reanimated dead had marched upon them, led by figures whose very swords radiated cold. The garrison stood no chance. They moved inland, said one ranger who clutched a bandaged arm. I don't know where they head next, but it's bad, my lord. Real bad. Alaric nodded, face grim. He knew time was short. If that undead host moved swiftly, they could threaten everything. With the vanguard's help, he scrounged enough food for the dragon's next flight, then rose again into the sky, determined to locate the enemy. He soared north by northwest, following the trail of icy devastation. The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the land in hues of orange and pink that did little to dispel the encroaching terror. And then he saw them. A vast column of undead marched through the pines. An army of rotting flesh, skeletal remains, twisted mockeries of once living beasts. They stretched as far as the eye could see, an endless legion. At their head rode tall, pale figures astride dead horses, their eyes glowing the color of a frozen moon. These were the others, the White Walkers. Alaric's blood chilled. Even from high above, he could sense their unnatural aura. He urged the dragon to descend, carefully, quietly. The beast's wings beat the air, stirring eddies of snow below. The White Walkers noticed. A horn blast or some eerie call echoed through the forest. The undead ranks halted, heads turning skyward. Alaric took a deep breath, then urged the dragon to attack. He had practiced with it a bit at Winterfell, coaxing forth its flame on command, though such a thing was still precarious. But now necessity demanded success. The dragon emitted a guttural roar, then unleashed a torrent of blazing fire upon the front line of wights. The results were immediate and devastating. Bodies were incinerated, flesh sloughing off bone in an instant of intense heat. A wave of flame consumed an entire swath of the undead column. The stench of burnt rotted flesh and the screech of superheated ice shards filled the air. Alaric exulted, steering the dragon along the line, drenching them in continuous flame. For a moment it seemed unstoppable. Wights exploded in blackened fragments. The snow melted in wide swaths. Then the dragon swung around for another pass. A pair of White Walkers raised their pale swords. Alaric felt an ominous shiver run through the air. A javelin of supernatural ice hurtled upward, narrowly missing the dragon's flank. Another spear soared past, close enough that Alaric felt the chill of its wake. The others had weapons of their own. He guided the beast in a sharp dive, unleashing another fierce wave of fire. Several White Walkers scattered, but one advanced, unaffected by the flames that devoured its white servants. It raised its sword, and frost crystallized in the air. The dragon, feeling the piercing cold, roared in defiance. Alaric felt his mount's anger surge. A final burst of flame erupted. Bat. Hing that White Walker in swirling fire. The creature let out an unearthly scream and reeled away, its ice armor cracking. Alaric did not linger to see if it perished. He pulled the dragon upward. More spears of ice soared at them. One nicked the dragon's wing and the beast roared in pain. Alaric clutched tighter, guiding it away, heart pounding. They rose above the swirling snow, retreating from the battlefield. Below, the ranks of wights, thousands strong, had been burned in great swaths, but many more remained. Still, the dragon's assault had clearly disrupted their advance, leaving great gaps and scorched craters in their formation. By the time Alaric returned to the vanguard, the sun had nearly set. He landed, breathing hard, the dragon's flank wet with a faint trickle of bluish blood where the ice spear had grazed it. Fear took hold in Alaric's chest. If even a glancing blow could wound such a powerful beast, what would a direct hit do? He reported swiftly. They are too numerous for a single attack to break them. The White Walkers themselves can withstand flame longer than their wights. But the dragon's fire does injure them. We must rally our forces and quickly. Over the next few days, ravens flew tirelessly. The small vanguard met with scattered groups of Night's Watch survivors, directing them to fortify at strategic points. More Northmen arrived from various houses, forming a ragged army near the wall. Still, the undead legion advanced methodically, slowed but not stopped by Alaric's repeated fiery raids. Each time, he and the dragon inflicted heavy losses on the wights, but the others hurled more spears of ice. Each close call left Alaric shaken. The dragon bore new scars, its temper stoked by pain. He soon realized they could not fight alone. A final stand would be inevitable, and if they could not break the White Walkers with concentrated force, all was lost. One bitterly cold dawn, the Northmen and Night's Watch formed up along a ridge near the last river, determined to block the undead host's path south. Makeshift palisades bristled with sharpened stakes coated in pitch. Archers stood ready with flaming arrows. Warriors with dragon glass weapons recently mined from old caches in the mountains held the front lines. Alaric soared overhead, scanning the dark forest to the north. A hush hung over the snowy landscape. Then a horn sounded in the distance, long, haunting, a harbinger of doom. The White Walkers approached. The first wave of whites surged out of the tree-lean, skeletal remains and rotted corpses moving with jerky speed. Arrows laced with fire cut them down while the pitch-soaked palisades erupted into flame, creating a wall of burning stakes. Yet more whites poured forth, scrambling over the charred remains. Northmen shouted war cries and brandished their steel. The clang of swords on bone and the shriek of the undead assaulted the air. Alaric urged the dragon into a dive, unleashing a sweeping arc of flame that incinerated scores of whites. The lines of living men roared in support, their spirits lifted. But then the others appeared, tall, pale figures at the edges of the forest, their icy swords raised. A wave of unnatural cold rolled across the battlefield. Fire dimmed. The flaming stakes crackled and hissed as frost crept over them. Arrows from the archers shattered before reaching the White Walkers as if an invisible barrier of ice deflected them. The men faltered, fear sinking in. But Alaric refused to relent. He directed the dragon to strike at the White Walkers directly. The great beast wheeled overhead, jaws opening wide. A torrent of fire rained down upon the pale generals of the undead. Some scattered or shielded themselves behind ranks of whites. Others tried hurling spears of ice. One spear glanced off the dragon's chest, leaving a ragged wound. Another sword passed Alaric's shoulder, missing by inches. Gritting his teeth, he pressed on. Flames roiled across the battlefield, melting snow into steaming puddles, reducing whites to ash. Gradually, the combined might of the Northmen, the Night's Watch, and the dragon's relentless fire began to push back the tide. White Walkers found themselves hemmed in by the savage blasts of heat. Men armed with dragonglass axes and spears surged forward, hacking and stabbing. Whenever a White Walker was struck by dragonglass, it shrieked and shattered like fragile ice. One by one, they began to fall. Yet new threats emerged, monstrous whites of bears and giants, the latter towering over the living lines, hurling boulders. Chaos engulfed the field. And all the while, the cold pressed in. Amid the frenzy, Alaric spotted the largest White Walker he had yet seen. A regal figure clad in jagged ice armor mounted on a skeletal horse with frozen sinews. It carried a wickedly curved blade of pale crystal. Where it passed, frost spread along the ground in spiderweb cracks. Alaric knew this must be a commander of the others, perhaps even their king. He urged the dragon to focus on it, diving low through the swirling snow. The wind whipped at Alaric's face. He guided the beast to exhale a cone of flame upon the rider. But this White Walker raised its sword, conjuring a barrier of thick ice that deflected most of the fire. The air crackled with steam. The dragon, enraged, clawed the ground, scattering whites in all directions. Alaric circled around, determined to strike again. He unleashed a second, more focused gout of flame. The White Walker's ice shield cracked. It snarled in a soundless fury, brandishing its sword, and hurled a spear of razor-sharp ice. Alaric ducked, but the spear clipped the dragon's right wing, tearing through membrane. Pain made the beast roar and veer off course, nearly throwing Alaric. Blood dripped onto the snowy ground below, sizzling from the creature's intense inner heat. The White Walker advanced, raising another ice spear. Desperation seized Alaric. He had to act before that second spear found its mark. As the White Walker pulled back its arm, Alaric steered the dragon into one last dive, ignoring the flaring pain he sensed from its wounded wing. They plummeted, claws extended, like a living meteor of fury. The White Walker hurled the spear. It missed the dragon's heart by mere inches, slicing a scale plate near its neck. In the same breath, the dragon crashed down upon the undead horse, crushing it, and snapped its jaws around the White Walker. There was a searing blast of flame. Alaric could feel the monstrous cold swirling, almost suffocating. For a heartbeat, he feared the dragon's jaws would freeze solid. But then the White Walker shattered, bursting into shards of ice and vapor beneath the conflagration. Alaric let out a ragged cheer as the beast reared up, roaring into the sky. With the apparent leader of the others destroyed, chaos rippled through the remaining whites. Many collapsed on the spot, dissolving into heaps of lifeless flesh and bone. Others fell upon the dragonglass-wielding warriors who pressed the advantage. The battle turned decisively. One by one, the White Walkers were surrounded, immolated, or smashed to bits. Their frigid aura receded. The Northmen, battered and bloodied, began to cheer. The undead host was undone. In the aftermath, the battlefield was a grim sight, piles of bones, melted patches of snow, entire swaths of scorched earth. The living forces had taken heavy losses. But they had prevailed. As the final whites crumbled to dust, a hush settled over the ranks. Eyes turned skyward, where Alaric and the dragon circled overhead, exhausted but triumphant. For the first time in generations, the North had seen the others rise, and for the first time, they had seen them broken by dragon fire. When Alaric landed, a roar of approval went up from the battered survivors. Night's Watch Rangers lowered their swords, kneeling in respect. Lords of the North approached, awe shining in their eyes. Even men who had doubted Alaric's abilities came forward to clasp his hand. And then, in the midst of the swirl of gratitude and relief, Lord Cregan Stark arrived, battered from fighting but very much alive. Without a word, he embraced his son, a rare show of paternal pride. Over the older Stark's shoulder, Alaric could see the dragon curling up on the steaming ground, wounded but alive, smoke rising from its nostrils. They had done the impossible. In the days that followed, the survivors tended to the wounded and confirmed the enemy's rout. Scouts ventured forth, finding scattered pockets of whites that quickly fell without their walkers to lead them. The frigid storms that had plagued the North began to abate. It was as if the land itself sighed with relief. Reports of the others vanished, replaced by whispered stories that the White Walkers had been cast back into the far, frozen north, broken and leaderless. Alaric's dragon required time to heal from its wounds. A broad slash in its wing membrane, several punctures in its scales. Under Alaric's care, heating stones to gently clean the injuries and salving them with mixtures recommended by maesters, the beast gradually regained strength. Its bond with Alaric deepened, forged in the crucible of battle. Men began calling the creature Ice Flame, for it had breathed fire upon the coldest horrors and prevailed. Alaric neither encouraged nor discouraged the name, though he quietly liked the sound of it. Tales spread beyond the North. Some believed it was a hoax, or a grand exaggeration, until travelers came back with accounts of the scorched battlefield littered with shattered ice bodies. More than ever, Winterfell stood as a beacon of resilience. Lords from farther south sent envoys, uncertain whether to fear or befriend a house that boasted the only known dragon in Westeros. In time, peace settled again, though wariness always lurked. For if once the others had stirred, they might do so again in some distant century. And if a Stark could tame a dragon, might others attempt it too? Yet in the North, there was only quiet triumph for the moment. The Age of Heroes had returned in a way none expected, an echo of the old tales, where men of great will and strange alliances rose to defend the realm. Alaric Stark lived on in legend long after those days. Ballads told of the boy who rode a dragon from the far reaches of the frozen wastes, of the day he rained fire upon an army of the dead and sent the White Walkers fleeing into the shadows. The small folk spoke of him as a hero favored by the old gods, the one who bridged ice and fire before the Targaryens ever came to Westeros with their dragons. Children grew up hearing of ice flames roar echoing in the skies above Winterfell, of how its presence kept the winds of everlasting night at bay. For Alaric himself, life was forever altered. He became a central figure in the North's defense, consulted on matters ranging from the rebuilding of Eastwatch to forging alliances with mountain clans. No one scoffed at the quiet, scholarly Stark any longer. He continued to pore over ancient manuscripts, seeking ways to ensure the realm remained vigilant. But he also took time to walk the godswood, reflecting on the improbable path that led him to a living myth. He found solace beneath the ancient weirwood's boughs, recalling how he had once read a half-destroyed parchment about dragons in the North, never imagining he would bring that rumor to life. Seasons changed, and the North began to thaw. Fields that had lain fallow were plowed anew. Trade caravans resumed, albeit cautiously. The memory of walking corpses and pale swords lingered, a sobering reminder of mortal fragility. Lord Cregan, aging faster than he might have liked, turned more responsibilities over to Alaric, and Alaric accepted them, knowing full well that with the dragon at his side, he bore the hopes and fears of many. His father eventually confessed a grudging pride. "You have done what I'd have called impossible," he told Alaric one evening by the hearth. "Perhaps you are not just my son, but the North's son, a legend reborn. Occasionally, Alaric took the dragon on flights north of the wall, surveying the battered forests and icy wastes. He remained vigilant for any sign that the others might regroup. Sometimes the silent tundra offered nothing but wind and distant mountains. Other times, he glimpsed wildlings who fled in terror at the sight of the winged shadow overhead. He left them be, not wishing to spark unnecessary conflict. He was searching for any cold presence, any flicker of blue-eyed menace. None appeared. In the wake of that final battle, the others had seemingly scattered. They might return generations hence, or never. But if they did, House Stark stood ready, in no small part because one young man dared to follow a dream no one else believed in. Years later, ballads were penned about Alaric's feats. Minstrels sang of Iceflame and the boy with wild courage who wrote it. They portrayed Alaric as a figure out of myth, tall as a giant and wise as an old wizard. The truth was simpler yet more extraordinary. A determined youth who studied old scrolls, sought out hidden truths, and took a chance no sane man would. He forged a bond with a creature older than the ancient kingdoms themselves, a bond that saved the North from a new long night. Though some might have claimed that the dragon was the true hero, after all it was its fire that shattered the White Walkers. Alaric knew better. It was the union of them both, man and dragon, that carried the day. The realm of ice needed the realm of fire, and he was humble enough to see how close they had come to failure. Had that final spear found its mark, had a lesser will tried and failed to earn the dragon's trust, had the North's lords not united behind them, all would have been lost. Yet it was not lost, and that was the legacy of Alaric Stark. While he breathed, the realm would not forget the cost of complacency. Nor would they forget the wonder that came from following hope in dark times. In the quiet months after the victory, when Winterfell's training yard rang with the laughter of younger scions and the clack of practiced swords, Alaric and his dragon sometimes slipped away to the heights above the castle. He would lounge against its flank, reading from weathered tomes by torchlight, while the dragon dozed, occasionally exhaling a lazy puff of flame into the night air. The stars shone overhead. Alaric would reach out, tracing old runes in the margins of a book, pondering the secrets of the children of the forest, the old gods, and the many mysteries that still lurked in the far corners of the land. Iceflame was a reminder that magic was very real, that the old legends of the Age of Heroes were not so distant after all. They lived on in the hush of the forest, in the hush of a dragon's breath. And so ended, or rather began, a new chapter in the story of House Stark. For though they were known as the Kings of Winter, as guardians of the North's chilly domain, they had claimed a beast of fire to stand as their watchful ally. In the songs sung around hearths in centuries to come, people spoke of how the Starks had once tamed dragons before the Targaryens ever set foot on Dragonstone. They debated if it was truth or fancy, for such was the stuff of legends. But the men and women who had been there, who saw Alaric perched upon the scaled shoulders of that mighty gray beast, who felt the searing heat of its flame against the creeping cold of the others, knew it was no lie. They had lived it. Winters came and went. Lords rose and fell. The world spun on as it always did. Yet House Stark remained, with the memory of a time when one of their own dared to believe in something impossible, and in doing so, safeguarded the North from a horror that had nearly claimed all life. Alaric Stark's hair turned gray over the years, and lines etched themselves around his once youthful eyes. But whenever the snows grew thick and the nights long, folk whispered that they could still see, high above the clouds, a shape of leathery wings and a flicker of fire dancing against the moon. And if they closed their eyes and prayed to the old gods, they might recall the day the Starks and their dragon hurled back the long night's minions. A day of legends. A day when ice and fire stood together, and hope took wing across the winter sky. Alaric Stark awoke in the pre-dawn darkness with a lingering sense of both triumph and unease. The victory over the others remained fresh in his memory. Whenever he closed his eyes, he could still see the hoarfrost clinging to the forest, the glimmer of those icy blades, and the roiling flames that had erupted from Iceflame's jaws to devour the dead. The North hailed him as its savior, whispering that he was touched by the old gods, that no one else could have tamed a dragon and driven back the long-forgotten terrors from beyond the wall. Yet Alaric could not banish a sense of foreboding. The old tales said the others retreated but never truly vanished. Somewhere in the darkest corners of the far north, their frost-bound power lingered, waiting. He had become a legend, but legends did not end with a single victory. Life pressed on, and the world's perils were never so simple as one great battle. That morning, he rose from his cot and dressed with silent efficiency, pulling on a thick quilted tunic and furs. A tepid autumn breeze drifted in through the arrow slit in his tower room, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke and pine. He was older now, though only a handful of years had passed since he first returned from the warm vale. It felt like a lifetime. His shoulders had broadened and lines of care had begun to mark his brow, small shadows beneath eyes that had seen too much too young. He thought of his father, Cregan Stark, whose hair had gone nearly white. The burden of leadership had grown heavier on Lord Cregan's shoulders, especially after the cataclysmic struggle that nearly consumed the North. In their few private moments, father and son sometimes spoke of transitions to come. Alaric knew, in an unspoken way, that the day might not be too far off when he would become Lord of Winterfell, both because of his father's age and because so many Northmen now looked to him, the Dragon Rider, as the center of House Stark's power. He made his way down to the courtyard, and servants and guards alike bowed or averted their eyes. His presence had become almost unsettling to some, reminiscent of both fear and adoration. He offered them a thin smile, a nod, trying not to let the reverence unnerve him. It was important that he remain approachable, that these men and women remembered he was no god, just a man who'd risked his life for the North. Sometimes, though, he feared that the line between mortal and myth had blurred beyond repair. His steps took him to the broad yard where Ice Flame now roost on most nights, a space that had once been the main training ground for archers. The old stables had proved woefully inadequate for such a creature of scale and fire. Instead, a portion of Winterfell's outer walls had been reinforced and an entire stretch of ground cleared. The stench of sulfur and char lingered in the stone from Ice Flame's frequent belches of flame. The dragon was enormous now, having grown broader and heavier with each passing year, its great wings scarred from battles but still strong enough to churn the air into a maelstrom whenever it launched skyward. As Alaric approached, he heard the beast's low rumble of greeting. Its head lifted, golden eyes reflecting the torchlight of the keep. He ran a hand down its flank, feeling the warmth that radiated from beneath the gray-silver scales. The beast's breathing stirred the dust at his feet. "Morning, my friend," Alaric murmured. He slid his palm in a slow, practiced rhythm. "Ing." The dragon's side, checking the old wounds. The scars from the ice spears had healed into ragged lines, though the dragon's wing membranes still bore a faint translucence where new tissue had grown. "We'll fly later today if all is well. It's time we tested your speed again." Iceflame huffed, heat rippling out of its nostrils. Alaric liked to imagine that, in the guttural rumbles and growls, there was an acknowledgement and agreement. He'd come to believe the beast understood more than people guessed. Dragons, in the legends of old Valyria, were said to bond with their riders to a point of near telepathy, though no one living in Westeros truly knew if that was literal or rumor. Alaric simply knew that the two of them had an accord, a melding of instincts that had saved them both in battle more than once. He was examining the base of Ice Flame's neck when he heard boots crunch across the gravel behind him. Glancing back, he saw Desmond approaching, still tall, still spindly, with the same earnest look he'd worn when they were only boys skulking out of Winterfell in secret. Desmond's presence always brought Alaric comfort. In a sea of new faces and shifting allegiances, Desmond was a fragment of the old days, a friend who saw Alaric not as some exalted hero but as the boy who once needed help saddling a mare in the middle of the night. Over the years, Desmond had grown into a capable organizer, seeing to all the countless tasks required to care for a dragon and keep the keep's day-to-day operations running smoothly. He dipped his head in greeting, his breath fogging in the chill air. "My lord," he said, then smirked. "Alaric," he corrected himself. "Lord Cregan would like to see you in the Great Hall. Words come from Moat Cailin and from the south." Alaric nodded, patting the dragon's side one last time. "How urgent?" Desmond's expression dimmed slightly. "From his manner, I'd say it's nothing good. He's been pacing." Then, in a lower voice, "He looks more worn than usual. I worry about him." Alaric understood. The last few years had weighed on his father. Though House Stark's prestige had soared after repelling the others, ruling remained a heavy burden. The North was vast, and the scars of that near apocalypse ran deep. Some holdings still struggled to recover from the relentless winter storms and the White Raids. Raids from the wildlings continued unabated in some regions, though they, too, had suffered from the others' incursion. Meanwhile, there were alliances and rivalries with other northern houses to navigate. Alaric was intimately involved in these affairs, but he tried not to overshadow his father's authority. Cregan, for all his sternness, deserved to see his rule carried through with dignity until he chose to pass the torch. He left Iceflame dozing in the courtyard and headed to the Great Hall, where he found his father standing near the main hearth, a wide map of Westeros laid out across a wooden table. The warm glow of the fire illuminated Cregan's face, revealing lines deeper than the last time Alaric had observed him closely. The old lord's once broad shoulders seemed a bit stooped. 2 house guards stood discreetly by the doorway, and an aging maester hovered near the table, scribbling notes. Cregan nodded to his son. "Alaric. Good. Close the door." Alaric complied, meeting the gaze of the guards. They stepped back but remained within earshot. Desmond said messages arrived. "They did," Cregan replied, gesturing to a small cluster of raven scrolls on the table. "One from Moat Cailin, one from the Neck, and another from the south, some petty lord who claims to speak for the Riverlands. Possibly a messenger from House Justman, if I recall the name. They're squabbling over territory, or so it seems." Alaric frowned. "There's always squabbling among the southern lords, but they usually leave the north be." "Yes, but I prefer they remain squabbling among themselves," Cregan muttered. "We have enough to worry about without some upstart crossing the Neck. The trouble is, rumor of a Stark dragon has spread far beyond these lands. Word is that merchants down in Old Town spin tales of a winged serpent in the north who burns entire armies with a blink. Half the realm believes it's just a fireside story, but half thinks it a threat. Some in the south might seek to neutralize that threat, or at least confirm it." Alaric's lips pressed together. "Let them come see for themselves if they dare. If they intend to force the north under their heel, they'll find fire waiting." Cregan's eyes gleamed. Spoken like a man who believes in his own legend. "Careful, son. It is not wise to rely on fear alone. The southern houses are many, and some have power enough to be dangerous. Our greatest advantage is that none can easily march an army through the Neck and come out unscathed, especially in a poor season. And if they do manage it well, your friend in the courtyard might well tip the scales. Still, I prefer peace if it's possible." Alaric bowed his head in acknowledgement. "What are the messages from Moat Cailin?" Cregan exhaled heavily. "They speak of bandits. Possibly ex-soldiers from the Riverlands or the Vale, drifting north in small parties. A few tried to waylay travelers on the causeway. The commander down there requests reinforcements. He's lost men to these raids." He tapped the map. "They're isolated incidents so far. But in the old days, when we were still recovering from the war against the dead, any group of sellswords or brigands drifting through might have been the beginnings of an invasion. And these days, with the north seen as both wealthy and terrifying, who can say what men will dare?" Alaric studied the ragged edges of the scrolls, the black wax seals. "I can send a small detachment to help. Or ride the dragon there myself as a show of force." Cregan waved a hand. "We'll handle it. I've instructed Lord Manderley to send some knights as well to help patrol the causeway. For now, your time is best spent ensuring the North remains united behind us. I received a letter from House Flint that expressed concerns about trade and protection, and the Umbers still nurse grudges with some of their neighbors. The only reason we all pulled together was the threat of the others. Now that that threat has passed, for the moment old rivalries resurface." Alaric grimaced. "Foolishness, but that's the way of men." A look passed over Cregan's face, part pride and part resignation. "It is. And it falls to us to keep them from tearing each other apart." His features softened then, and he placed a hand on Alaric's shoulder. "How fares our winged friend?" "He's well, though the old wounds still ache when the weather shifts. There are times he grows restless, as if the walls of Winterfell feel too confining for him." Cregan nodded. "That's understandable. There was a time I never thought I'd see such a beast rest peacefully within these grounds. Now our people greet him with a kind of awe. But a creature born free, living in a hidden vale beyond the wall. I doubt the confines of a castle suit him. Perhaps take him on longer flights, show your presence in the north. Let men see that House Stark is not idle. Sometimes a glimpse of dragon wings overhead is enough to discourage foolishness." Alaric considered that. "I will do so. If you have no objection, I might also stop by Long Lake and some of the outlying hamlets that were hit hard in the final battles. Let them know we haven't forgotten them." A small smile touched Cregan's lips. "A good plan. Go tomorrow if the weather holds." They spoke a while longer, going through the details of supply lines, rumors of tensions among minor houses, and the complexities of how best to fortify Eastwatch. which still lay in ruin but was slowly being rebuilt with the help of House Stark's resources and the Night's Watch. Even though winter had ebbed for the time being, the memory of near annihilation was fresh enough that many, especially Alaric, insisted that the watch remain strong. At last, Alaric bade his father farewell and stepped back into the courtyard, rubbing his temples. He had never imagined that leading men and juggling alliances would be so exhausting. Sometimes it felt more daunting than riding a dragon into battle. A flight might clear his head. But he had to see to a few matters first, including a meeting with the castellan about winter stores. Hours later, after all the day's mundane chores had been addressed, Alaric found himself standing atop the outer wall, gazing down at the courtyard where Ice Flame half-dozed in the late afternoon sun. The beast's sides rose and fell in a slow rhythm, steam drifting from its nostrils whenever it exhaled. The men assigned to watch over the dragon and ensure it didn't wander into trouble kept a wide berth. Now and then a stable boy would approach cautiously to remove old bones from the feeding area or scrub away ash. No matter how often they'd done it, they never lost that edge of apprehension. Dragons, after all, were not domesticated horses. Even tamed, they remained lethal. Desmond approached, leaning against the stone parapet beside Alaric. "I have good news, if you can bear it," he said quietly, a wry note in his voice. Alaric arched a brow. "I'd welcome any kind. What is it?" The huntsman returned from the Wolfswood with enough game to last a fortnight. "We'll need it. Feeding a dragon is no small feat, but they say the forests show signs of healthy regrowth. Some of the old foresters mentioned that the dire wolf packs are thriving again, which they take as a good omen." Alaric smiled. "That is good. The land recovers then." "As do the people," Desmond added. "Slowly, but it's happening. The nightmares fade, even if the memories do not." He studied Alaric's face. "So, what news from your father?" Alaric repeated what Cregan had told him about southern lords stirring and minor bandit troubles. "It seems we'll never have a shortage of problems." "But that's no surprise." Desmond watched Ice Flame below, the dragon's ridges casting long shadows across the yard. "You plan to do a circuit of the north, yes? To reassure folk that we stand vigilant?" "Yes. If I leave tomorrow, I should return within a week, maybe two, depending on how many stops I make." "And if you find more than you bargained for?" Alaric's gaze hardened. "Then we face it. But with luck, we'll find nothing but watchful peace." He hesitated, then added, "I'd ask you to come, but the flight might be grueling, and we need someone to keep Winterfell running smoothly. Father relies on you more than he'll admit." A faint grin touched Desmond's lips. "I'll remain then. But come back safe. The last time you rode out alone for weeks, you returned with a dragon. Let's hope this trip is less dramatic." Alaric laughed softly. "Yes, let's hope." Early the next day, the sky was a pale blue streaked with wisps of high clouds, perfect for flight. Alaric prepared Ice Flame, ensuring the harness was secure. A small pack of supplies was tied behind the saddle, a few changes of clothes, dried meats, a tinderbox. He wore layered leather and furs along with gloves reinforced to handle the scalding heat that occasionally pulsed from the dragon's neck. The north's crisp air bristled against his cheeks as he climbed astride, the watchers clearing a path below. Some parted with bows of respect, others murmured blessings. Alaric had grown used to such displays, but each time he felt an odd pang of humility. He was only a man, and yet men saw him as something more. When he gave the signal, Ice Flame beat its wings with a thunderous whoosh, kicking up swirling clouds of dust and bits of straw. The courtyard fell away beneath them. Alaric guided the dragon into a steady climb over Winterfell's walls. The castle spread out like a toy fortress in the morning light, its towers and ramparts dwarfed by the vastness of the north beyond. He circled once to acknowledge the watchers on the battlements, then angled northeast, heading toward the White Knife and the forests beyond. The exhilaration of flight washed away some of Alaric's worries. Up here, the struggles of alliances and bandits felt distant. The wind whipped through his hair, and each wingbeat rumbled through his body. From this vantage, he could see farmland laid out in patchwork squares, thin lines of roads, the shimmering silver of rivers. Now and then a cluster of smoke indicated a village coming to life. He kept Ice Flame at a high enough altitude not to spook livestock, though farmers in the fields often paused to gawk at the massive shape crossing the sky. He felt a mingled pride and responsibility. To them, the dragon was both a guardian and a living reminder of the extraordinary times in which they lived. By midday, he glided down to a clearing near a remote hamlet by the White Knife. Just the act of landing sent villagers into a flurry of excitement and alarm. Children peered from behind huts, wide-eyed, while older men clutched spears. A local headman cautiously approached, recognized Alaric's Stark sigil, and bowed low. Alaric dismounted, soothed Iceflame with a touch, and assured the villagers he meant only to check on them. Their relief was immediate. They offered him a portion of a fresh kill, a large boar, to give the dragon. Alaric accepted with a polite smile, had the men help him dress the boar, and fed it to Iceflame on the spot, which was quite the spectacle for the local folk. They watched in awe as the dragon breathed a short spout of fire over the carcass, then tore it apart with razor-sharp teeth. He spent some time speaking with them, hearing their concerns. They told him of roving wolves which might threaten their livestock. He inquired if they'd seen any suspicious travelers. Most shook their heads. One woman mentioned a pair of ragged men passing through a fortnight ago, but they'd moved on without causing trouble. Alaric encouraged them to remain watchful but assured them that peace seemed to hold. They bowed and praised his name, and he felt again the weight of his reputation. However humble he tried to be, these people clung to the idea that Alaric on his dragon would single-handedly keep them safe from all threats. Such a pattern played out across the next few days. He would select a region, perhaps near a smaller holdfast or a cluster of farmsteads, land in a safe clearing, speak with the locals, and glean any rumors of trouble. Often he found only gratitude and curiosity. Some had never seen a dragon in their entire lives, only heard wild stories. They would ask how he'd tamed such a beast, or whether it drank blood or only devoured goats. Children squealed with a mix of terror and delight when Iceflame let out a resonant snort. Alaric took care to keep the beast calm, never letting it approach a village unannounced. If fear flared up, he'd back off, not wishing to kindle panic. On the third day of his journey, he arrived at Long Lake. The wide expanse of water sparkled under the midday sun, framed by dense pine forests. It was a place once threatened by white incursions. Alaric still remembered flying over these shores during the final battles, seeing cabins burned and families devastated. Now, a gentle bustle of recovery was visible. Wooden huts had been rebuilt and fishing boats dotted the waters. He landed on a rocky outcrop near the northern shore, away from the settlements. Gathering a small pack of supplies, he left Iceflame to rest and made his way on foot through the pines toward the lake's edge. The crisp smell of resin and wet bark enveloped him. The path eventually led to a humble fishing village, perhaps 20 or 30 families. He noticed lines of drying fish, neat stacks of recently chopped timber, and the comforting normalcy of a community that had resumed everyday life. Dogs barked at him as he emerged from the trees. Some fishermen paused to look, recognized the stark sigil on his cloak, and called out welcomes. A young man approached, wearing a simple tunic and broad hat. "My Lord Stark," he said, voice wavering. "We heard tales of your flight. Did you come to see if we fared well?" "We do, thanks to you and your father. And your dragon." Alaric smiled gently. "I'm glad to hear it. The winter was harsh and the battle harsher, but I see you've rebuilt. Are there any troubles lately? Bandits or creatures from beyond the wall?" The young man shook his head. "Some wolves, but that's normal enough. And no sign of more wights, praise the old gods. We appreciate the watchful eye of Winterfell." Alaric spent a little while speaking with some of the village elders, ensuring they had supplies for winter and discussing trade routes. Word spread swiftly through the cluster of huts that he was here, and curious onlookers hovered at a respectful distance. One crone reached out to touch the hem of his cloak as if to verify he was flesh and blood, not some legend conjured by rumor. Alaric let her, offering a nod. She smiled toothlessly, pronouncing him a good omen. He made his polite farewells soon after. He returned to Iceflame, stroking the dragon's muzzle. They took flight again, circling over Long Lake in a slow, sweeping arc. Beneath them, boats drifted lazily in the water. Alaric felt a tug of satisfaction, seeing how life carried on. His father had once told him that true lordship was not about wealth or glory, but about ensuring the realm endured. Observing these peaceful folk, Alaric finally understood that on a deep level. How Stark existed to protect and guide the people of the North, not just to rule from a position of fear. He directed the dragon eastward, following the shape of the lake's coastline for a while before angling south toward the last river. He planned to circle back to Winterfell after another day or two unless trouble demanded otherwise. The afternoon sky was clear, and he took a moment to marvel at the sweeping panorama beneath him. Hills undulated, covered in thick forests that glowed green in the summer sun. The memory of that brutal, endless winter when the others roamed felt distant now. But he refused to grow complacent. The threat might return one day. The old gods only knew when. In late afternoon, he spotted something peculiar below, a thin line of smoke curling up from a clearing where no village or hamlet should be. He squinted, urging Iceflame into a gentle spiral downward. As they approached, he saw a group of tents, makeshift lean-tos, and what looked like a series of horse corrals. A temporary camp of some sort hidden amid the pines. Suspicion prickled through him. He counted at least 24 figures moving around, armed by the look of it. He decided to investigate. Sometimes trading caravans set up temporary camps, but their presence was usually known to local villages. This looked more like a mercenary or bandit encampment. As the dragon neared, he spotted men rushing about, pointing upward. A few raised crossbows or bows, though they looked unsure about whether to try firing at a beast so large. Iceflame let out a challenging roar, which echoed through the clearing. Alaric guided the dragon to land on a rocky knoll nearby, within shouting distance but out of immediate arrow range. He dismounted and stood tall, hoping to project the calm authority that often defused hostile situations. He cupped his hands around his mouth. "You there? I am Alaric Stark of Winterfell. What is your business in these woods?" A rustle of alarm passed through the camp. Some men ducked behind trees, while a few bolder ones stepped forward. Alaric counted at least 5 wearing mismatched armor, not a proper uniform from any known northern house. Their posture spoke of readiness, maybe desperation. One man, bearded ND broad-shouldered, called back, "We're free travelers. Heading south by old forest roads. No harm to anyone, my lord." Alaric's gaze flicked to the corrals. He saw at least a dozen horses, some branded with marks he recognized from the south. The overall collection of gear, shields, swords, ragged bedrolls suggested sellswords or men on the run. "Travelers rarely hide in out-of-the-way camps," Alaric replied, voice carrying. "If you seek passage, you could have approached a known holdfast. Instead, you lurk here." There was a tense pause. The bearded man shifted, exchanging glances with his fellows. Finally, he called, "We meant no offense to your lands, my lord. Some of us were with lords in the Riverlands, but war ended and left us with nothing. We drift where we can. If we've trespassed, we beg pardon." Alaric couldn't read sincerity in the man's tone. He stepped a bit closer, mindful of letting Iceflame remain a visual deterrent behind him. "If that's the truth, then you have little to fear. We Starks are not unkind to honest travelers. But if you plan banditry, I can't allow that." He studied their faces. "Either pack up your camp and proceed south in a lawful way or submit to watchful escort by my men if you intend to remain in the north. We're not so foolish as to let an armed group roam freely. Which will it be?" Another moment of hesitation. Alaric could almost taste their fear. The presence of a dragon behind him was likely the only thing preventing a violent response. At length, the bearded man nodded. "We'll move on, my lord. We want no quarrel. Allow us a day to gather our horses and gear." Alaric considered. He could attempt to detain them, but it might end in bloodshed. And Winterfell wasn't near enough to send guards quickly. He was alone in this. "Very well," he said. "But if I hear of raids or attacks in your wake, I'll hunt you down on Dragonback." They exchanged uneasy looks, murmuring acknowledgments. Without further ceremony, Alaric returned to Iceflame and took flight again, circling overhead to ensure they understood the warning was real. He lingered high in the sky, watching as they scattered into frantic preparation, presumably to depart. He had no illusions they might still cause trouble, but at least he'd unsettled them. Let that be enough for now. By sunset, he'd put many miles behind him, choosing to camp near a stony ridge overlooking a bend in the last river. With no keep or inn nearby, he made do with the wilderness, setting up a small fire in a sheltered nook of rock. Iceflame curled around the base of the ridge, radiating warmth that kept the worst of the chill away. The night felt strangely peaceful. Alaric reclined against a boulder, chewing on dried venison. Now and again, he rose to tend to the dragon, murmuring soft words as he stroked the beast's rough scales. It was in these quiet moments, away from prying eyes, that Alaric remembered how improbable his life had become. Once he was a boy sneaking out of Winterfell to chase stories. Now he was caretaker of the realm's most formidable creature. Sparks drifted from the fire into the dark sky where countless stars shimmered. He watched them for a time, his mind drifting to the lore he'd read about dragons in ancient times. They were symbols of transformation, of bridging the gap between what was possible and impossible. Perhaps the North's identity was undergoing a transformation too, shifting from a land shaped by cold and hardship to something stronger, tempered by the memory of real horrors but unified by the knowledge that they had survived them together. He slept fitfully, dreaming of swirling snow and flickers of blue eyes in the darkness. At one point, he jolted awake, hand gripping for a sword that wasn't there. But only the hush of the forest greeted him and the rhythmic rumble of ice flames breathing. Dawn came slowly, painting the eastern sky in pale lavender. He let the dragon hunt briefly. He watched from a distance as it soared over the river valley, diving with lethal grace to snatch a deer in its claws. The raw power on display still made his heart pound, even after all this time. He continued his circuit, visiting a few more villages and holdfasts, finding no urgent crisis beyond minor complaints of theft or local feuds. By midday on the 5th day he began the journey back to Winterfell. The flight took him across gently sloping hills and the frostfangs glinting in the far west. The sky was clear but the wind brisk, forcing him to lean forward to keep balance in the saddle. Despite the exhilarating freedom, a longing for home stirred in him. It was near twilight when he finally sighted Winterfell's familiar walls in the distance. The setting sun gilded the battlements and a faint column of smoke rose from the kitchens. His father must still be awake, no doubt poring over maps or speaking with advisors. Alaric guided Iceflame into a wide arc, announcing his return with the thunder of wings. Guards on the ramparts called his name. He landed in the courtyard with a jarring thud, half frozen from the altitude and stiff from the long ride. Desmond was there, greeting him with a wide grin. "You're back in one piece," he said, offering a hand to help Alaric dismount, though the dragon rider hardly needed it. "Mostly in one piece," Alaric teased. His expression became serious. "No major troubles. Met a band of likely brigands, but they vowed to leave the north. Villagers and hamlets are in fair shape." Desmond nodded. "Your father will want a report. He's in the solar." Alaric handed the reins, such as they were, to a stable hand who looked terribly unsure how to stable a dragon, then gave Iceflame a gentle pat. The beast let out a small snort, too tired to protest. It would remain in the courtyard or possibly prowl around the outer yard, seeking a place to doze. Alaric stretched, rolling his shoulders, and followed Desmond into the keep. They navigated the corridors lit by flickering torches, eventually coming to a modest solar just beyond the great hall. Lord Cregan stood by a table strewn with parchments, along with the maester and a couple of household knights. At the sight of Alaric, Cregan's face broke into a weary smile. "Welcome back, son. I trust the skies were kind." "As kind as they can be," Alaric replied, removing his gloves. "I have a full report, though nothing dire." "How go matters here?" Cregan let out a breath, gesturing to the table. "We have developments. Word from the Neck is that a small group of armed riders was seen crossing into our lands. The descriptions might match your so-called travelers. Also, a southern envoy arrived while you were away, an emissary from the Riverlands. He's resting in the guest chambers now. He claims he carries an offer we cannot refuse, but he's yet to share it until we convene a proper audience." Alaric frowned. "What offer?" Cregan shrugged. "Likely some nonsense about alliances or a request that House Stark pledge loyalty to a southern king. They've always claimed sovereignty over the north in stories, though none has ever succeeded in subjugating us. Could also be a trade proposition. Hard to say." Alaric suppressed a sigh. The idea of a southern alliance or a threat felt more draining than he'd expected. Still, they had to handle it carefully. The north was strong, but they had no desire to march an army beyond the Neck if conflict could be avoided. "Let's hear him out, I suppose." "That's the plan," Cregan said. "Tomorrow, after he's rested from his travels, we'll hold a gathering in the Great Hall. I want you at my side, of course." Alaric nodded. He realized he was bone-tired, craving a hot meal and a chance to wash the journey's dust from his skin. Yet the realm's responsibilities gave no quarter. Sensing his fatigue, Desmond ushered him away. "Go eat, get cleaned up. We can speak more after you've rested." Reluctantly, Alaric agreed. He took a quick meal in the hall, thick stew, fresh bread, a cup of mead, and found solace in the simple act of eating among familiar faces. A handful of guards teased him good-naturedly, asking if the dragon had caused storms in the sky. He managed a tired grin in response. Then he retired to his chamber, splashed water on his face, and collapsed into bed with the swirl of thousands of thoughts drifting in his mind. The last thing he heard before sleep claimed him was the distant sound of Iceflame's rumbling call echoing in the night. Morning dawned gray and cool, with a fine mist clinging to the courtyard. Alaric dressed in formal attire, dark gray wool, the Stark sigil embroidered on his breast, a heavy fur cloak draped over his shoulders. He strapped a sword at his waist, though more as a symbol of status than a genuine necessity. Since the last great battle, he rarely went armed within Winterfell's walls. Today, though, they were receiving a southern envoy who might well be a harbinger of complications. Appearances mattered. When he stepped into the great hall, he found it alive with murmured conversation. Servants moved about, lighting braziers to dispel the chill. Lords and knights of minor houses who happened to be in Winterfell also gathered, curious about this southern stranger. Desmond stood to one side, arms folded, scanning the crowd. At the far end, on the raised dais, Cregan Stark sat in the Lord's chair, his posture tall and imposing despite his advancing years. Alaric took the seat beside him. Their bannermen grouped around, forming a ring of northern presence. A hush fell as the southern visitor was announced and escorted in. He was a man of medium height, with curly brown hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His clothing was of fine cloth, dyed in a rich green hue, trimmed with gold thread. No armor, just a small dagger at his belt, likely for show. His bearing was polite, but Alaric noticed the flicker in his dark eyes as he surveyed the hall. The visitor inclined his head in deference. "My Lord Stark, I am Aemon Rivers, envoy from House Justman of the Riverlands. Grateful for your welcome." Cregan nodded curtly. "Welcome to Winterfell. You traveled far? What business brings you?" The envoy lifted his chin slightly. "I come at the behest of my lord, King Bernard Justman, who currently rules the Trident. He has heard many tales of the legendary bravery of House Stark and of the dragon said to dwell here. He wishes to extend an invitation, an alliance of mutual benefit. My Lord King believes that we share certain interests, and he hopes to formalize a bond that could prove advantageous." A stir passed through the northern onlookers at the word king. Technically, in the Age of Heroes, the North was its own kingdom. House Stark bore the title King in the North, or King of Winter. The fact that the Justmen styled themselves Kings of the Trident was not surprising, but hearing it spoken aloud in Winterfell had a certain edge. Cregan's voice remained level. "I have heard the Justmans rose to power along the Trident some years past, uniting various petty lords in that region. Why should we be interested in an alliance? Historically, the North has had little cause to entangle itself beyond the neck." Envoy Aemon inclined his head again. "Times are changing, my lord. My king is well aware of the troubles that recently plagued you, rumors of the others, of dire battles. He believes that only by forging strong ties can our lands be safe. He offers trade agreements, shared resources, and a pledge to come to the North's defense should any southern host seek to challenge your rightful sovereignty. In return, he humbly requests your friendship and the assistance of your dragon should a dire threat arise in the Riverlands." Alaric caught the subtle hush that enveloped the hall. It was no secret that many would covet the power of a dragon. House Stark had used it to defend the realm, but also to secure its authority. If the so-called King Bernard Justman wanted the dragon's fire as a weapon in his own struggles, that was a dangerous precedent. The older lords in the hall exchanged uneasy glances. Cregan leaned forward. "He requests our dragon? That is a high ask." Aemon made a placating gesture. "Merely a mutual defense pact. Should the Riverlands be threatened by, say, the Stormlands or the Westerlands, and if our own might proves insufficient, we ask that House Stark consider aiding us with the dragon's power. Of course, we would likewise send men, supplies, even gold if the North were to face a threat that overwhelmed your resources." Alaric watched the envoy's expression carefully. He sensed a carefully rehearsed pitch. The man was trying to make it sound so reasonable, so equal, yet everyone in the hall knew a dragon was worth entire armies. The notion of handing that advantage over to a southern king, even temporarily, rankled him. Before Cregan could respond, Alaric spoke up. "And what troubles does King Justman foresee in the Riverlands that he would require a dragon's involvement?" Aemon's gaze shifted to Alaric, a hint of curiosity in his eyes. He likely recognized the younger Stark's face from the legends. "None at present, my lord. Merely a precaution. The Reach and the Westerlands are powerful neighbors. Tensions often simmer. King Bernard hopes to prevent war altogether by deterring aggression. The knowledge that House Stark stands with him might dissuade others from testing him. It is a wise strategy, no?" Alaric's voice remained calm. "It might be wise for him, yes. Less so for us, perhaps. Flying a dragon south on another man's behalf is no small matter. And we do not wage war lightly." Aemon nodded as if expecting such resistance. "We understand. My lord also suggests a potential betrothal, one of his daughters, perhaps, to a Stark heir. That bond would formalize our pact, ensure an enduring peace and shared prosperity." The hall erupted in murmurs. Alaric kept his expression neutral, but inside he bristled. The idea of some arranged marriage to cement a southern alliance was not inherently outrageous. Noble houses did it all the time, but he disliked the idea of being offered up as a piece in a game of power. He stole a glance at his father, who wore a faint scowl. Cregan tapped the arm of his chair with a rigid finger, then forced a measured tone. "This is much to consider. We do not make such decisions lightly or quickly. We'll take your offer under advisement." Aemon bowed. "I am at your disposal, my lord. I can remain in Winterfell as long as you deem necessary to answer any questions." With that, the formalities concluded. The great hall buzzed with conversation as Aemon was led to a side table for refreshment. Some lesser lords approached him, curious about the ways of the Riverlands. Cregan turned to Alaric, eyes narrowed. This was bound to happen, he murmured. Someone from the south wanting a share of the dragon's power. And no doubt there will be others. Alaric nodded. They're trying to harness our victory for their own ends. If we ally with the Riverlands, we risk being drawn into their conflicts. If we refuse, we might anger them, and who knows how that might play out. The older Stark Lord exhaled slowly. I'm not about to let the North become a pawn in southern wars. But rejecting them outright might bring an equally dire risk, especially if they form alliances against us. The North stands strong, but even we have limits. The question is whether it's better to keep them at arm's length or string them along with diplomacy. In my youth, I'd have spat at the notion. Now he shook his head. We live in changing times. Alaric understood. The memory of the others taught them that no kingdom was truly isolated. But at the same time, being entangled in foreign quarrels didn't sit well. We should learn more about this King Bernard. If his position is tenuous, we might find ourselves bailing him out repeatedly. Perhaps we can send scouts or envoys of our own to the Riverlands and see what the truth is. Cregan rubbed his jaw. Yes, that's prudent. We can stall the betrothal proposal, for starters. Let me think on it. For now, I'll have the Maester pen a polite acknowledgement of his request, with no commitment. He eyed Alaric. I won't force you into a marriage alliance if you have no stomach for it, boy. You've done more for this house than any father could expect of a son. Alaric felt a surge of affection for the old man. Thank you. I'll do my duty if it's truly needed, but I'd prefer not to be paraded as a bargaining chip. Cregan patted Alaric's shoulder, a rare show of fatherly warmth in public. We'll find a way forward. In the meantime, keep your eyes open. Men from the south can be cunning. Alaric watched the envoy Aemon mingling with a small knot of curious northern knights. There was a flicker of something in the man's manner, an easy smile, a confident stance that suggested he was used to navigating uncertain courts. It confirmed Alaric's suspicion that any slip of the tongue could be used against them. This was a game of measured words as well as swords and dragons. He eventually excused himself from the dais, mingling briefly with other bannermen who wanted to greet him. Questions flew at him about the alliance, about whether the dragon might be seen in the south. He gave noncommittal answers, gently redirecting them. Then he retreated to the courtyard where he found Ice Flame resting on a patch of flagstones warmed by the morning sun. The dragon blinked lazily at him, tail curling around its massive body. Alaric moved closer, aware of the hush that often fell when he communed with the beast. A few onlookers hovered at a distance, grooms, a knight or two. He heard their whispers. Look at him, calm as can be, he's the only one who dares that close, they say the dragon's bigger than the Great Keep. Exaggerations, but only slightly. Ice Flame was enormous, bigger than the day it burned the dead on the battlefield, and that was a memory that seared itself into people's minds. He pressed his hand gently to the dragon's flank. Ice Flame rumbled, shifting enough to let Alaric stand beside its neck. You hear the talk of alliances, old friend? Alaric murmured. He knew the dragon couldn't truly understand the intricacies of politics, but it often soothed him to speak aloud. They want to use your fire for their wars. Should we let them? The dragon's only reply was a low snort, a puff of hot breath that curled in the cool air. Alaric managed a small grin. He sensed the beast's underlying tension, perhaps it had caught the anxiety from the crowd's mood. No matter what happens, Alaric whispered, the North comes first. The old Stark words were clear enough, winter is coming. They had braved that winter and emerged, and he intended to ensure they never forgot the lesson, survival was paramount. If alliances with southern kings risked the North's safety, was it worth it? He spent most of the day in meetings with his father and trusted advisors, discussing how to handle the Riverlands proposal. It was decided that Aemon Rivers would remain in Winterfell for a time while they seriously considered the alliance. In truth, they wanted to glean more information about House Justman and their ambitions. Word was sent to various northern lords to gather what they knew of the Riverlands' internal politics. Meanwhile, a few discreet scouts would head south, posing as merchants or travelers to assess the situation firsthand. Amid all these discussions, Alaric kept returning to a single point, the delicate balance between using the dragon as a shield for the North's security versus using it as a weapon in foreign conflicts. The line was thin, and stepping over it might plunge them into perpetual war. The Targaryens, who would one day become infamous for uniting Westeros under dragons, were not yet a known power in this age, but Alaric grasped the danger of becoming a tyrant if he used Ice Flame to impose northern will on others. Though some of his own bannermen whispered that he should do exactly that, why not unify the entire continent under House Stark, once and for all? Perhaps the notion was tempting in a raw, primal sense. But Alaric wanted no such ambition. The memory of the others still haunted him, a reminder that there were more terrifying threats than petty mortal squabbles. He would not spill rivers of blood just to expand a realm that might be swallowed by the next unnatural winter anyway. Better to preserve a steady peace, remain vigilant, and ensure the North was safe when the next great horror arose. Days turned into weeks, and Aemon Rivers ingratiated himself into Winterfell's routine. He dined at the main table, complimented the local cuisine, praised the resilience of the North. He charmed more than a few northern knights with his ready wit and stories of life along the Trident. Alaric watched him carefully, suspecting the envoy was always probing for glimpses of the dragon or hints of House Stark's internal workings. For his part, Alaric shared nothing of consequence, ensuring that Aemon's curiosity about Iceflame remained largely unsatisfied. The envoy never got close enough to the dragon to see more than the occasional feeding, and each time, Alaric or one of his men politely but firmly guided him to observe from a safe distance. Meanwhile, tidings arrived from the Neck. The watchers there confirmed that small groups of armed men, likely outlaws, had been skirting the causeway trying to slip into the north. Lord Reed of Greywater Watch sent word that a few had been captured in the swamps, but others might still roam free. The press of trouble from the south was no coincidence, Alaric suspected. Wars in the southern kingdoms created an endless stream of displaced fighters and deserters. The North's relative peace made it an attractive prospect. He found himself longing for a simpler era if ever such a thing existed. Then, one cold morning, the hush of Winterfell was broken by shouts echoing from the main gate. Alaric, who had been breaking his fast in the hall with Desmond, leapt up, heart pounding. He and half a dozen guards rushed outside to see the commotion. A pair of muddy riders had arrived at the gatehouse, half-frozen, breath-heaving. They wore the black cloaks of the Night's Watch. Alaric's skin prickled. Whenever the watch came in haste, ill news followed. He strode forward as the riders dismounted, almost collapsing from fatigue. What happened? Alaric demanded, voice urgent. Speak. One of the rangers lifted his head, ice clinging to the edges of his beard. My lord, we've seen lights in the far north beyond the wall. Strange lights, the old magic. Men have gone missing. The Lord Commander sent us to warn you. He fears a new stirring. Alaric's blood ran cold. The others? We don't know for certain, the ranger stammered. But the signs are ill. The free folk speak of whites emerging again. A scouting party from Castle Black vanished. We found no bodies, only blood and footprints leading into the deeper woods. All around them, the courtyard went still as death. The memories of that great conflict with the others were fresh enough that simply mentioning them caused people to blanch. Alaric sucked in a breath, trying to steady himself. For years now, they'd clung to the hope that the threat had truly receded, perhaps for generations. Yet the watchers on the wall knew better than to proclaim false alarms. He turned to Desmond, jaw tight. We must speak to my father and gather a response. Quickly. They hurried into the keep, the exhausted rangers trailing behind, seeking warmth and food. Servants and guards gave them a wide berth, sensing the tension. They found Lord Cregan in the solar with the maester, conferring about supply inventories. The news hit him like a physical blow. Alaric watched the color drain from his father's face. Gods preserve us, Cregan muttered, hands trembling slightly. After all we did to drive them back. We don't know yet if it's them, Alaric said, though his own chest felt tight. It could be a smaller group of undead, stragglers from the last conflict. Or perhaps some new evil. The free folk have all sorts of superstitions. But we need to act swiftly, find out the truth. Cregan's gaze hardened. Yes. You'll take the dragon to the wall and see for yourself. If the others truly stir, we must rally every man in the north again. We do not wait until an army of dead stands at our gates. Alaric nodded. The old fear twisted in his gut, mingled with a grim determination. If the others had returned in any capacity, Iceflame's fire might once more be their best weapon. He couldn't deny a pang of dread. The dragon was older, bearing scars from the last war, but so was Alaric. Could they muster the same courage to face that horror again? He squared his shoulders. I'll prepare immediately. Desmond will oversee Winterfell in our absence. Father, you should begin mustering forces, discreetly if possible. We don't want to spark a panic. Cregan agreed, though his eyes betrayed deep worry. Yes, discreetly. If the threat proves real, we'll call the banners. If not, well, let's pray we can stand down. But gather what evidence you can. What of the southern envoy? Alaric asked. Cregan scowled. Let him remain here. If he sees we're in crisis, perhaps he'll realize we have no interest in meddling in their affairs right now. Or maybe he'll try to exploit our distraction. Either way, we can't focus on that now. Our priority is defending the north. An hour later, Alaric was in the courtyard, strapping supplies to the dragon's harness and briefing a handful of men who would ride north by horse and meet him at Castle Black. He didn't want a large retinue. Speed was critical. Desmond hovered, anxious, double-checking everything. Alaric refused to let his own tension show, though his pulse pounded with every breath. "If it's a false alarm, I'll be back soon," Alaric said in a low voice, clasping Desmond's forearm. "If it's real, you know what to do." Desmond nodded, eyes haunted by old memories. "We'll be ready." Alaric climbed into the saddle. The courtyard watchers backed away, hush falling over them. He gave a final look to his father on the steps. Cregan stood there, expression grim, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Then Alaric nudged Ice Flame, and the dragon sprang upward with a thunderous blast of wind, carrying him high above Winterfell's walls. He angled north, toward the wall. The flight was exhausting. Clouds churned overhead, threatening snow. The wind battered him, biting through his layers. He pressed the dragon onward, mindful of any sign of the unnatural cold that heralded the others. The expanse of pine and tundra stretched out below, silent and white. He paused only briefly to rest the dragon outside small keeps along the way, stirring anxious questions from the garrisons stationed there. "Is something wrong, my lord?" they asked, and Alaric could only say he was checking on urgent rumors. At last, the wall's colossal mass loomed on the horizon. Even from a distance, it was an awe-inspiring sight, hundreds of feet of solid ice stretching across the continent, tinted a pale blue in the winter sun. Alaric saw the towers of Castle Black, small as children's toys against the colossal barrier. As he neared, alarm horns sounded, though presumably the Night's Watch recognized the shape of the dragon from previous visits. He descended into the yard inside the castle, scattering black-cloaked men who dashed to clear the landing area. Lord Commander Roderick Welk, a grizzled veteran, approached, leaning on a cane. He had survived the last war at great personal cost, losing half a leg to a white's bite. Alaric dismounted, offering a respectful nod. "Commander." Welk returned the gesture. "Alaric Stark, we prayed we'd never need to send that message. But you've heard, I see." "Yes." "Rangers brought word." "Tell me everything." The Lord Commander gestured for Alaric to follow him inside. They gathered in a dim chamber near the mess hall, joined by a handful of senior rangers who wore grim expressions. Welk sank onto a bench with a weary sigh. "We had a patrol go missing north of the wall, 4 men led by Ser Bron Greywood. They should have returned days ago. We found their tracks, a lot of blood, but no bodies. The free folk who came in afterward spoke of seeing pale shapes in the woods, of hearing eerie calls on the wind. And, to top it off, some of our watchers on the wall reported lights flickering at night in the distance. Possibly torches. Possibly something else. It's reminiscent of the last time." A chill settled in Alaric's bones that had nothing to do with the weather. "Have you sent additional scouts?" Welk grimaced. "A smaller group went out just to see if we could locate any sign of survivors. They returned shaken, claimed they found a broken sword of Ser Bron's covered in rime as if supernaturally cold. They saw footprints that led deeper into the forest. But they did not see whites or white walkers outright." A young ranger, face pale, piped up. "My lord, the free folk we spoke to were convinced it's the dead stirring again. They said the last time they had glimpses of pale riders before the main army formed." Alaric rubbed his temples. "We have to confirm. If the White Walkers truly gather again, we must not repeat our past mistakes. I'll take the dragon beyond the wall, see what I can find from the air. I'll be careful." Welk clenched his jaw. "Brave words, but be mindful. We can't afford to lose you or your beast. The others in Winterfell might be able to muster an army, but we both know how important that dragon's fire was last time." Alaric met the commander's gaze evenly. "I understand. But knowledge is the best weapon we have. I'll fly at dawn." He spent the remainder of the day conversing with the Watch, going over maps of recent sightings, hearing the free folks' rumors. None of it gave a definitive answer, only a mounting sense of unease. By dusk, Alaric felt the weight of dread growing. Memories of that final battle against a legion of the dead flooded back, the stench of burning flesh, the ice spears that tore through the dragon's wing. Would they face that horror again so soon? Night settled in. The wind whistled across the top of the wall and the temperature plummeted. Alaric found a corner in the old commander's tower to rest, though sleep came in short, restless bursts. His mind churned, imagining every scenario. If the others had truly returned, the entire north would mobilize, but even then, victory was not guaranteed. They had caught the enemy off guard last time, united by desperation and wielding the dragon's fire as a surprise. Now, if the others had grown more cunning. At the first gray light of dawn, Alaric rose. He donned furs, a heavier cloak, and made sure to bring a dragonglass dagger at his belt. Steel was useless against the White Walkers, but dragonglass could shatter their icy forms. He also carried a short spear with a dragonglass tip strapped to his saddle. He had no illusions about fighting them on foot if the dragon was somehow neutralized. The memory of ice spears that threatened to bring him down weighed heavily in his thoughts. But caution was all he could rely on. He stepped into the courtyard, breath fogging in the icy air. Night's watchmen milled about, subdued. Ice Flame stood near a small bonfire they'd built to keep it comfortable, though the dragon's own heat seemed more than sufficient. Seeing Alaric approach, the beast perked up, releasing a deep rumble that resonated off the stone walls. A hush fell as men turned to watch the dragon rider preparing for what might be a perilous scouting mission. Lord Commander Welk stumped forward, leaning on his cane. If you see signs of them, return immediately. Don't engage. The last thing we want is to lose the dragon in an ambush. Alaric forced a nod. I promise I'll be careful. If I find anything definitive, I'll let you know and head back south to rally the north. If I find nothing, he let the sentence trail off. Perhaps it was best not to label that possibility as mere illusions. The watch's instincts were seldom wrong. He mounted Ice Flame, the harness creaking slightly under his weight. The dragon let out a growl, arching its neck as if eager to be off. Alaric gripped the reins. Open the gate to the north courtyard. We'll take flight there. Watchmen hustled to comply, pushing open the massive gates that led to the outer yard beneath the looming wall. The wind snatched at Alaric's cloak as Ice Flame padded through, leaving deep claw prints in the frosty ground. The crackle of ice underfoot was the only sound until they emerged in the open space. The dawn sky was a dull silver, heavy with the threat of snow. Alaric took one last look at the men gathered on the ramparts above. Then he nudged Ice Flame, and the dragon launched into the air with a powerful downbeat of its wings. They rose swiftly, clearing the height of the wall's top. Alaric felt a surge of vertigo even after all these years at the sheer scale of the wall. The bitter wind stung his face. Below him stretched the haunted forest, an endless sea of pine and fir dusted in white. Clouds drifted low, veiling the horizon. Beyond lay the wild lands, the frost fangs, and in the far distance, the realm of perpetual ice and legend. His heart pounded. He guided Ice Flame forward, heading deeper into that wilderness. At first, he saw only endless forest, broken by occasional clearings or rocky outcrops. The hush of early morning was absolute. The dragon glided in sweeping arcs, scanning for any sign of movement. Alaric's eyes roamed the snowy ground, the treetops, searching for anything that might betray an army of undead or a cluster of White Walkers. But the forest remained still. He pushed farther. In the back of his mind, caution stirred. The others were cunning. They might hide or travel by night. But he had to try. Eventually, he spotted a broken expanse of ground where a shallow ravine cut through the trees. From the air, he noticed dark splotches in the snow like old bloodstains. Heart-lurching, he guided Ice Flame to circle closer, searching for a place to land that would allow him to investigate on foot. Finally, he found a clearing big enough for the dragon. They dropped down, stirring up swirling clouds of snow. Alaric slid off the saddle, spear in hand, heart pounding. Stay alert, he murmured, though he knew Ice Flame didn't need to be told. The dragon's nostrils flared as if catching scents. Alaric trudged through knee-deep snow toward the ravine, flanked by looming pines. Silence pressed in. The dark splotches were indeed blood, frozen and scattered in patches, leading toward a cluster of rocks near the ravine's edge. With trembling caution, Alaric approached. He found a scrap of black cloth, half buried in the snow. His stomach clenched, Night's Watch attire, likely from the missing patrol. He scanned the area, searching for footprints, but the wind had scoured most away. Still, he found a partial imprint that looked like a barefoot. His breath caught. That was the calling card of Whites. As he stood there, the hair on his neck prickled. Ice Flame let out a low growl, heat rippling in the air. Alaric gripped the spear, turning slowly. He saw nothing at first, just pines and drifts of snow. Then, movement. A figure emerged from behind a tree. Its skin was ashen, eyes glazed with a faint blue glow. A White, wearing the tattered remains of a Night's Watch cloak. Alaric's pulse hammered in his ears. The White stared blankly, then let out a ghastly hiss and charged, stumbling over the snow but moving faster than any corpse should. Alaric braced himself, raising the spear. Ice Flame roared, but the White was too close for the dragon to simply flame without risking Alaric. The creature lunged. Alaric sidestepped, driving the spear's dragonglass tip into its chest. A shriek tore the air, and the White collapsed, body unraveling into brittle fragments. He stood panting, scarcely believing it. That single White was enough to confirm the worst. The dead indeed walked again, at least in some measure. Before he could gather himself, another shape lurched out from behind a fallen log. Then another, creeping from the shadows. 3 more wights, grotesque with missing patches of flesh, advanced on him. Alaric realized there could be more hidden among the trees. He backed up, inching toward the clearing where Iceflame crouched. The dragon snarled. In the next instant, it unleashed a narrow jet of flame, incinerating 2 of the wights before they could reach Alaric. The third stumbled back, then sprinted forward blindly. Alaric pivoted, thrusting the spear once more. The dragonglass shredded through its rib cage. It too crumbled into shards of ice and bone. A heavy silence fell, save for Alaric's ragged breathing and the crackle of fading flame. Smoke curled in the cold air. He scanned the woods, expecting more. None appeared. But the knowledge that even 4 wights existed here was enough to send dread coursing through him. The others might not have assembled a vast army yet, but they were clearly at work, raising the dead once more. He hurried back to Iceflame, clambering into the saddle. The dragon took off in a rush of wings, ascending above the treetops. Alaric guided it further north, hoping to see if there was a larger gathering of undead. After an hour of searching, he caught glimpses of more footprints, strange disturbances in the snow. No massed army, not yet, but scattered pockets of wights lurking in the forest. Enough to spell doom for any unwary ranger. The worst sign came when he glimpsed a tall figure in the distance, pale against the snowy backdrop, watching from atop a ridge. A white walker. Even at a distance, Alaric felt the hair on his arms stand on end, recalling the lethal grace and unearthly cold that radiated from their kind. He urged Iceflame closer, though with caution. The figure disappeared among the rocks, as though melting into the terrain. The sense of being outmaneuvered prickled at Alaric's nerves. He realized continuing deeper into the north alone was reckless. He had the confirmation he needed. The others had returned, or at least some portion of their cursed ranks. Another war might be brewing. Reluctantly, heart pounding, he turned Iceflame back toward the wall, racing the setting sun. He dreaded delivering this news. His father and all the lords of the north had hoped the threat was ended. But hope was fragile in a land where the dead could rise again. By the time he reached Castle Black, nightfall was descending. Men rushed to meet him, anxiety etched on their faces. He slid off the saddle, nearly collapsing from the cold and exhaustion, and managed to gasp out, "Wights! White Walker out there." That was all they needed. Alarm spread like wildfire. The Lord Commander's face twisted with horror. "We have to warn the entire north. Raise the alarm," Welk murmured. "This can't be allowed to grow." Alaric nodded, forcing himself upright. "I'll fly to Winterfell at first light. We must gather an army, the dragonglass, everything we have. We'll strike hard and fast, before they can build a legion." His mind churned with the logistics, coordinating houses, preparing for war. The dread was matched only by a grim determination. They had done it once. They could do it again if they acted swiftly. But the fear gnawed at him. Those might be more cunning this time, attacking from multiple angles, perhaps forging alliances with wildling clans who feared them. The future felt precarious. That night, as Alaric tried to snatch a few hours of restless sleep in Castle Black's dim quarters, he dreamed of ice spears and swirling snow, of the dragon's flame guttering in a howling blizzard. He awoke sweating and pressed a hand to his chest, reminding himself that they still had a chance to stop the threat before it reached full strength. The old gods willing, the North would stand united once more. At dawn, he took flight southward, cloak snapping behind him. The biting wind seemed sharper than usual, as if heralding a long and bitter winter. Iceflame flew with powerful strokes, perhaps sensing the urgency in Alaric's tense posture. Below them stretched the endless expanse of the north, dotted with quiet villages, sleepy forests, rivers half-frozen. All were oblivious to the doom lurking beyond the wall. Alaric's thoughts spun on the complexities of raising a defense. He would call the banners, yes, but how swiftly would they rally? And would the southern envoy still be in Winterfell, pressing for an alliance, oblivious to the real horror knocking at their door? Finally, Winterfell's gray walls rose into view, wreathed in morning mist. Alaric wasted no time, guiding Iceflame into a jarring landing in the courtyard. Guards rushed forward, startled. Desmond appeared, face pale at the sight of Alaric's expression. "Gods, you've returned so soon. Is it?" Alaric slid from the saddle, trembling with cold and adrenaline. "They're back," he said in a low, urgent voice. "Whites, a White Walker scattered now, but that won't last. Summon my father. Summon every lord we can. We must prepare for war." Shock and fear rippled through the courtyard, the memory of that old nightmare flooding back. Men who'd been young squires during the last war blanched, their eyes wide. Servants gasped. Desmond swallowed hard. "I'll gather them. Quickly." Alaric's chest tightened as he led Ice Flame to its roost, giving brief instructions to the stable hands to bring fresh food. He could hardly think, his mind racing ahead to the battles that loomed, the heartbreak and horror that awaited if the North faltered. All the while, the old words hammered in his skull, "Winter is coming." The phrase had never felt so raw, so perilous. He had once believed they'd banished the others for a generation or more. But now the realm stood on the brink once again, and the burden of defending it would fall to him, his dragon, and the men of the North. He made his way into the keep, bracing himself for the urgent war council to come. Servants were already lighting extra braziers in the great hall, as if more warmth could banish the chill that clung to their bones. The hush in the corridors spoke of dread. Alaric forced himself to keep moving, promising silently that he would not waver no matter how terrifying the challenge. They had triumphed once, and they would do so again or die trying. In the distance he heard Ice Flame's roar echo off the castle walls, a clarion call that seemed to herald the uncertain days ahead. Alaric stood in the center of Winterfell's great hall, surrounded by a ring of anxious faces. The flickering torchlight danced across stone walls, and the murmuring of the assembled lords and knights felt like the distant rush of an oncoming tide. In his heart, fear beat like a war drum, steady and powerful, but he refused to let it consume him. Word of the new threat had spread quickly through the keep. A handful of whites, maybe more, had been sighted beyond the wall, and traces of a White Walker loomed in the haunted forests. The old nightmare was stirring. The North had not even fully shaken the memory of its last near destruction, and here it was again. Cregan Stark, leaning on the Lord's chair, looked older than ever. His hair was nearly all gray now, and weariness haunted his eyes, but his voice remained steady. He scanned the assembled lords of various northern houses, Mormonts, Flints, Tallhearts, Serwins, Riswells, Glovers. Each face reflected the same undercurrent of dread and determination. They'd fought these devils once before. Many here still bore scars of that conflict, both visible and hidden. They might have hoped for decades or centuries of peace. Fate, it seemed, had granted them only a few short years. Alaric took a half-step forward, clearing his throat. "My lords," he began, voice carrying through the hall, "you know why we've gathered. The news from the Night's Watch is dire. The dead roam again. The White Walkers have been seen, at least one. Possibly more. We cannot let them fester, cannot wait for them to raise another army of corpses. We must strike before they grow in number. That is the surest way to save our people from a second long night." A muttering of assent swept the crowd. One older knight, Sir Heron of House Riswell, stepped forward, face set. "We stand with you, my lord. But do we have proof they're truly returning, or might these be scattered remnants from the last invasion?" Alaric nodded at him. "I fought 4 whites north of the wall only days ago and glimpsed a pale figure on a ridge. The signs are unmistakable. The Night's Watch lost a patrol, and the footprints, the cold, all matched the other's handiwork." Heron's shoulders slumped. "Then the gods help us. Our fields haven't even fully recovered from the last war." Lord Mormont, a big-bearded man with broad shoulders, rumbled, "What's the plan, my Lord Stark? Shall we gather all swords at the wall again? Or do we lure them south and fight on better ground?" Cregan lifted a hand. "We must coordinate carefully. If the others are still scattered, we have a chance to crush them piece by piece. But we need men on the ground, men who can navigate the forests beyond the wall, and we need the Night's Watch Rangers to guide them. And we need Alaric and his dragon to provide overwhelming force." All eyes turned to Alaric. He stood tall, though inwardly he felt the old churn of anxiety. The presence of a dragon in the north was a game-changer, but it was also a responsibility that no other man or woman carried. He let his gaze pass over the circle of lords. "Yes," he said quietly. "We know from the last war that dragon fire is our strongest weapon. The whites can be cut down by steel, but the White Walkers themselves are vulnerable to dragoglass and intense flame. If we act swiftly, we can root out their lairs beyond the wall, find where they're hidden, and burn them. But we can't do it alone. We need a joint effort with the Watch and perhaps the Free Folk. We won't have time to build elaborate defenses. The best defense now is to go on the attack." Lord Serwyn, a younger man with nervous eyes, interjected, "And how do we pay for this? We just finished rebuilding. We can't conscript every able-bodied man for a campaign beyond the wall. Winter's still near enough that our harvests are not bountiful. If we strip the fields of laborers, we risk famine. Cregan's jaw tightened. I understand. But if the others mass again, a famine will be the least of our worries. They'll kill or raise every man in your fields, burn your barns, turn your loved ones into whites. This is a matter of survival. A somber hush followed. Then Lady Mormont's cousin, a lean warrior with deep-set eyes, spoke up. Lord Stark, if we are to fight again, we'll need dragaglass in large supply. We used it up in the last war, or so I'd heard. Alaric nodded. We have some reserves from the caches we found in the mountains. The Night's Watch reported they discovered more deposits near Eastwatch by the sea. We can send men to mine it. Additionally, we can scavenge old battlefields from the last war. Much dragaglass was left lying among the dead. It's not ideal, but it's a start. The lords exchanged grim glances, each weighing the cost. Alaric pressed on, seizing the moment of resolve in their eyes. I propose we assemble a vanguard force. Volunteers only. Men who faced the threat before or who believe wholeheartedly in the need to do so. They'll rally at Castle Black, coordinate with the Watch, then strike deep into the forest, with me and Ice Flame overhead. Lord Glover, arms folded, said, and if the White Walkers scatter, how do we pin them down? Alaric shifted. We may need the free folk to help us track them. They know that wilderness better than anyone. I'll approach them with an offer of safe passage and cooperation. In the last war, they fled south from the dead, but many fought alongside us when push came to shove. Some of the more conservative lords scowled at the mention of wildlings. Yet no one voiced outright dissent because by now the North had learned that the living must unite or perish. Grudging acceptance showed in every face. Cregan planted his hands on the arms of his chair. Then it settled. We call for volunteers, well-armed, well-supplied, but not so large an army that we starve our fields. We'll keep a second muster in readiness at Winterfell and the other strongholds in case the enemy tries a flanking move. This is a scouting and extermination campaign, not a full-scale war unless it grows into one. Send ravens at once. The lords murmured their assent. Alaric could feel their fear, but also a grim pride that they would stand again to protect their homeland. That mixture buoyed his own resolve. He took a long breath, glancing around. I'll depart within days. In the meantime, see your men outfitted with as much dragaglass as you can muster. My father will coordinate from Winterfell. I'll lead the strike in the field. Nods all around. And so the council broke, each lord departing to ready his forces. The great hall emptied in a swirl of cloaks and hushed anxiety. Cregan and Alaric lingered, conferring with a few key advisors. The older Stark wore a tight expression, tension etched into every line of his face. He placed a hand on Alaric's shoulder. You realize you'll be taking on a savage winter wilderness again. You almost died last time. We both did. Alaric lowered his head. I realize it. But I have to do it. We have to strike quickly. And I am still the only rider Ice Flame tolerates. That's how it must be. Cregan nodded, though it clearly pained him. Gods keep you safe. Desmond appeared in the hall's shadows, waiting until the last of the lords had gone. He stepped forward, voice subdued. Alaric, do you want me with you this time? Or shall I remain here to manage things for your father? Alaric gazed at his oldest friend. I'd welcome your presence beyond the wall. You always were good at handling details. But father needs a capable steward to keep the supply lines going, to direct ravens, to track who's volunteering and who's staying behind. I fear you'll be of more use here, even though it pains me to go without you. Desmond hesitated. He had once accompanied Alaric into the frozen unknown, back when they were only boys searching for a rumored dragon. That adventure had forever changed their fate. Yet this mission was something else, an outright campaign against death incarnate. Quietly he said, as you wish. I will coordinate from Winterfell. But if things turn dire, I'll come north in a heartbeat. Alaric offered a small, grateful smile. I know you would. Thank you. He turned, glancing across the hall, and his eyes fell upon Aemon Rivers. The southern envoy stood at a respectful distance, wearing an unreadable expression. Though not officially part of the war council, Aemon had obviously listened to the talk. Seeing Alaric's gaze, he stepped closer and bowed his head. Lord Alaric, Aemon said softly. I heard enough. It seems your people face a renewed danger. Alaric kept his voice guarded. We do. A threat from beyond the wall. The same that once nearly destroyed us. Aemon's eyes narrowed in thought. I've heard rumors of these others and their undead hordes, though I'd believed them legend or, at best, a past emergency. My condolences that you must face them again. Alaric inclined his head. Thank you. I trust you understand we have no time now for extended negotiations about alliances or marriages. Our entire focus is on preparing to counter this threat. As you've just heard, men are needed and we must gather resources. The king in the north calls his banners. Aemon's expression grew thoughtful. Of course. My own business is overshadowed by these events. But perhaps my lord's offer might prove helpful in this very moment. Alaric frowned. How so? In the Riverlands we have many skilled archers and foot soldiers who are presently unengaged. If House Justman saw opportunity, namely, to prove our worth in the eyes of House Stark, we might send men north to aid you. Lend our strength and resources. In return, well, we would hope for some sign of goodwill toward an eventual alliance. Alaric's jaw clenched. He smelled the maneuver instantly. The envoy was seizing the crisis as leverage. If the North was desperate for more troops, maybe they'd be more inclined to accept a formal alliance that might one day demand the dragon's fire in a southern war. As distasteful as the timing was, Alaric had to admit that additional soldiers could make a real difference, especially if the others truly gathered in force. He glanced to his father, who'd also approached. Cregan's eyes were flinty. Do you speak on behalf of your king, or is this your personal speculation? Aemon's smile was thin. I speak with his authority. He recognized that the North's famed resilience might be tested again someday. He did not expect that day to come so soon, but the principle stands, we'll help if it fosters a lasting bond. Cregan exhaled. We'll consider it, but do not press us for terms now. We have no time for betrothal talk or detailed treaties. If King Bernard Justman sincerely wishes to aid us, let him muster a force and send it. If you stand with us in this crisis, I'll remember that generosity when the threat is done. That's the most I can promise. Aemon inclined his head graciously, though Alaric detected the satisfaction in his eyes. Your word is enough. I'll dispatch a raven to my king at once, describing the situation. I suspect he will rally men in short order. Alaric said nothing further. He suspected this arrangement would grow complicated in the aftermath, assuming they survived. But for now, even a trickle of southern swords might help hold a line or guard supply routes. He gave Aemon a curt nod, then turned away, mind already churning with the urgent tasks at hand. All that day, Winterfell bustled with preparations. Ravens flew in and out, bearing messages summoning volunteers from across the north. Blacksmiths toiled non-stop, reforging old weapons and tips with dragonglass shards. In the courtyard, wagons rolled in carrying supplies of dried meat, warm furs, ropes, and other gear essential for an expedition beyond the wall. Alaric supervised the mustering carefully. He wanted speed, but also quality. Impatient knights or hot-headed youths might do more harm than good if they marched into the frozen wilderness unprepared. He spoke personally with many of the men who'd survived the last war, gleaning their insights. The others were cunning, able to strike at night or vanish when threatened. The only advantage the living truly had was surprise and the dragon's fire. By evening, a small corps of veterans had assembled under Winterfell's banner, forming the nucleus of this vanguard. Alaric recognized some faces: Greybeard Ged, who'd lost 2 fingers to a white's jaws, Sir Jory Flint, who'd fought with a dragonglass spear at the gates of Eastwatch, half a dozen others who bore the scars of that terrible winter. Though older now, they had the steel in their eyes of men who had seen the true face of fear and did not intend to yield to it again. Night fell in a hush of drifting snow. Alaric tried to find rest in his chamber, but his thoughts whirled. He stepped into the corridor and made his way to the ramparts, where he could look down upon the courtyard. There, lit by moonlight, ice flame dozed near the far wall. The dragon's bulk heaved slowly with each breath, sending faint tendrils of steam into the crisp air. Alaric pressed a hand to the cold stone, letting his gaze linger on that formidable silhouette. Once he and this beast had driven back the others in a fiery storm that stunned the world. Could they manage the same feat a second time? The memory of those shining blue eyes, the ice spears, the bone-chilling aura that gnawed at even a dragon's heat made him shudder. Fire was powerful, but the cold of the others felt older, deeper, like a force from the dawn of time. He stayed on the ramparts until the wind bit at him, then returned to his chamber. Sleep was elusive, but eventually exhaustion claimed him, dragging him into shallow dreams of swirling snow and fleeting shadows. He awoke before dawn, dressed swiftly, and ventured to the hall where the volunteers were gathering. Desmond was already there, directing distribution of gear with the efficiency he'd mastered years ago. Your father's in the solar, Desmond murmured, glancing up from a ledger. He asked for you. Also, more men arrived overnight, small retinues from various houses. Roughly 100 are in the yard now. Alaric nodded. That's good. I'll see my father. He found Cregan seated at a table cluttered with scrolls, a steaming mug of something hot cradled in his hands. At Alaric's entry, he glanced up. We have about 200 men pledged so far. Not enough to form a massive army, but a decent vanguard. And more will likely trickle in as the days pass. Alaric sat across from him. I won't wait for them all. Every day we delay, the enemy could be raising more corpses. A core force leaves tomorrow. Additional troops can follow as they arrive. Cregan nodded slowly, lines of worry etched into his brow. Your plan is to ride to Castle Black, coordinate with the Watch and the Free Folk, then push north in searching sweeps? Yes. Iceflame can do aerial scouting. We'll focus on spots where the White Walkers might hide, caves, ravines, hollows in the forest. We'll smoke them out and burn them down. That's the idea. If we can find their main group, we strike hard before they become unassailable. Cregan sighed, rubbing his temples. The entire North prays you succeed. This time, if they mass, we may not have the element of novelty that helped us last time. The others know about the dragon now. They might have new tricks. Alaric's stomach tightened. I've thought of that. We'll do what we must. Cregan gave him a long look, then gripped his shoulder. Go with the blessing of the old gods. And be careful. They clasped forearms. Alaric left feeling a surge of familial love tempered by an acute sense that they might not meet again if fortune turned. That day and night, final preparations roared ahead. More men arrived, a few from the Umbers, a handful from the Karstarks, even a small group from White Harbor armed with crossbows and short swords. By the time dawn broke on the chosen day, over 300 riders and foot soldiers were assembled in Winterfell's courtyard, bearing Stark's dire wolf banners and house sigils of their own. Most wore heavy furs and leathers, only a few had mail or plate because the cold made metal armor a severe liability. From ramparts and balconies, onlookers watched, faces taut with fear and hope. Alaric mounted Iceflame in the presence of them all, the dragon snorting steam in the cold air. He wore a fur-lined cloak over padded armor, and on his belt hung the dragoglass dagger. In a specially fashioned shay. Attached to the saddle rested a longer spear, also tipped with dragoglass. The watchers drew back as the dragon spread its wings, shadows rippling across the snowy ground. Beside the main gates, the men formed up, prepared to march. Alaric signaled to open the gates, then urged Iceflame to lift off, hovering above. With a final glance at the keep's tall towers, he guided the dragon forward. Behind him, the massive troops began moving at a steady pace, their horses and supply wagons clattering over the frozen road. They would travel together as far as the wall, though Iceflame might range ahead at times to scout the path. Desmond remained atop the walls, raising one hand in farewell. Beside him, Cregan Stark stood silent, letting the sight of his son leading men into the second battle of his lifetime sink in. Wind whipped across the courtyard. Alaric dipped the dragon's wings in a salute, then turned north, steel in his heart. The journey to Castle Black took several days, slowed by snowy roads and the need for care. Alaric alternated between riding with the column and scouting from overhead, ensuring no unexpected ambush. At night, the men camped in ringed formations, lighting large fires to keep out the biting cold. Though no wildlings attacked, attention haunted them. Wolves howled in the distance, the nights felt darker than they should. Now and then a soldier started awake, claiming to have dreamt of pale silhouettes at the edge of the woods. Sleep was scarce. When the column finally reached the wall, they found Castle Black bristling with activity. Lord Commander Welk greeted them at the gate, leaning on his cane. His face wore a grim acceptance of what was to come. You've come in force, he said, gaze sweeping over the lines of northern warriors. I wish we didn't need it, but we do. Alaric dismounted and clasped the commander's forearm in greeting. Any new sightings? Welk frowned. Yes. Another patrol vanished near Craster's Keep. Free folk are telling us the dead have been spotted roving in small packs. They're scattered but numerous. The more they kill, the larger their ranks will grow. That's how it starts. Alaric's lips thinned. Then we have no time to waste. Are the free folk willing to meet with us? Yes. We've made contact with a small settlement that survived the last war. Their leader, Gorn, is suspicious of Southron intentions, but he hates the others more than he hates us. If you meet with him, maybe he'll guide you to the hotspots. Alaric nodded. I'll do so. We'll rest the men a day, stock up on supplies, then push north. My father's sending more as they're mustered. We can't wait for all of them, but every blade helps. Welk gazed up at Iceflame, who had landed outside the walls, occasionally releasing a thunderous growl. The men still speak of how that dragon saved us the last time. It's good to see him again, though I dread the reason. In the courtyard, soldiers unloaded crates of dried rations, dragonglass-dipped arrows, and bandages. The chatter was subdued, but Alaric recognized in many the same resolve that had carried them to victory years ago. They had done the impossible once, forging alliances, brandishing fire against the night. Now that same spark burned in them. Failure was unthinkable. If they failed, the North would be lost. Even the riverlands or the entire continent might not escape the spread of undead. Alaric took advantage of the rest day to meet Gorn, the wildling leader. He flew Iceflame a few miles east to a smaller settlement nestled against a rocky hillside. The huts were made of rough timber, many half-buried to keep out the wind. When the dragon descended, men and women gathered with spears and crude bows, alarmed. But Gorn, tall, lean, with a braided beard, stepped forward, forcibly lowering one of his men's spears. His sharp eyes flicked over Alaric, then the dragon. "Stark," Gorn said in a gravelly voice. "I remember you from the last time. You flew overhead while we ran for our lives." Alaric dismounted carefully. "And we bled for the same cause, to keep the dead at bay. The whites have returned, Gorn. You know that." Gorn spat onto the frozen ground. I do. Took my cousin's entire camp. Left nothing but blood and footprints. So you want my help?" Alaric kept his tone calm, ignoring the suspicion in Gorn's gaze. "We need guides who know the land beyond the wall better than any kneeler might. If you help us track the dead, we can destroy them, prevent them from sweeping south again." Gorn folded his arms. "I lost many kin in that last war. And I don't fancy marching under your banners." He jerked his chin at Iceflame. "But that beast's fire does kill the White Walkers. That's reason enough for me to join, so long as you promise not to turn on us once it's done." Alaric met his eyes steadily. "We didn't turn on you last time. We accepted you south of the wall. Some of you returned north. The rest stayed. We're not your enemies, not while this threat remains." Gorn snorted. "Huh. We'll see. But I hate the dead more than I distrust you, so I'll gather those willing to fight." He pointed at the dragon. "Better your flame than their ice." Alaric inclined his head. "Agreed." That single conversation paved the way for a fragile cooperation. Over the next day, groups of free folk trickled to Castle Black, carrying axes, spears, bone knives. Some had seen whites with their own eyes. A few had lost family in violent ambushes. Their hatred for the others eclipsed all else. They camped near the wall, separate from the kneelers, but Alaric felt a measure of relief seeing them. They were hardy, skilled at navigating the trackless wilderness. That might make the difference between success and futility. With the pieces in place, Alaric convened a final meeting with Commander Welk, Gorn, and the northern officers. Spread across a rough table was a hastily drawn map of the region north of the wall, the Frostfang Mountains to the west, the icy coast to the east, and the dense forest in between. Red marks indicated rumored sightings of whites, black crosses denoted lost patrols. "We'll start by sweeping eastward," Alaric said, pointing at a region near Craster's Keep. "They seem active there. If we find them, we burn them out. Then we push deeper. We'll break into smaller units at times, guided by free folk, but we stay within signal range so the dragon can support any group that needs it." One of the northern captains asked, "What if we find a large host?" "Retreat." Alaric's voice was steady. "If it's too large, yes, pull back, call for me. We can't afford to get pinned down by a horde. If the White Walkers appear, remember your dragonglass. Don't engage them alone if you can avoid it. Wait for me in Iceflame." All nodded, though tension lined their faces. Commander Welk tapped the table. "We'll keep Castle Black secure. More men arrive each day. If you're overwhelmed, fall back. We'll muster a larger force. The entire north stands ready." Alaric ended the meeting with a sense of finality. It was time to move. There would be no perfect plan, no guarantee of success. They had to trust in their combined might, in the memory of how they'd once triumphed. That night, no one slept soundly. Men sharpened weapons, checked their furs, murmured prayers. Alaric performed a last check on Iceflame, running a hand along the old scars in its scales. The dragon sniffed the wind, seeming on edge as though it sensed the returning evil that once inflicted pain upon it. At dawn, the vanguard set out beyond the wall. Riders, foot soldiers, and wildlings trudged through the tunnel that pierced the ice, emerging onto a landlocked in perpetual cold. The sun was a wan disk in a pale sky. Alaric soared overhead on Iceflame, scanning the horizon. Snow stretched in all directions, broken by dark pines that loomed like sentinels. The chill wind whipped at his cloak, forcing him to hunch low in the saddle. For 2 days, they found nothing but the bleak hush of winter. Gorn's wildlings led them around hidden pitfalls, across frozen streams, under the eaves of silent forests. Occasionally, they found faint traces, half-buried footprints, spatters of frozen blood from an old kill, the stump of a campfire that no living men would dare to light in such a place. Each sign told them they were on the right track, chasing the other's scattered presence. On the third day, as twilight fell, the first true confrontation occurred. Alaric was flying a short scouting run over a cluster of pines when he glimpsed a swirl of motion on the ground, a group of wights descending upon a small band of wildlings who had scouted too far ahead. Immediately, he signaled Ice Flame to dive. The dragon unleashed a roar that shook snow from the branches. The wights, a ragged dozen, turned their dead faces upward. Some began to scramble away while others raised skeletal arms as if to hurl themselves at the dragon. Ice Flame exhaled a jet of fire that consumed half of them in a rush of flame. Alaric caught a glimpse of the wildlings, 3 men, battered and bleeding, trying desperately to stab at wights with crude spears. He guided the dragon to pass low, a second blast incinerating more of the undead. Black smoke and the stench of burning flesh filled the air. One wight, missing half its skull, kept stumbling forward until the fire took it. Another lunged behind a tree only to be cut down by a dragonglass-tipped arrow from a distant vantage. The entire skirmish lasted mere moments. When it ended, the clearing was littered with smoldering corpses that crumbled into brittle shards. Alaric circled back and landed, letting Ice Flame clear the last embers with a hiss of heat. The wildlings looked shaken but alive. One recognized Alaric from Gorn's camp and managed a nod. "Thank you, Stark," he muttered, voice taut. "You saved our skins." Alaric shook his head. "We're all in this together. Can you walk?" "We'll head back to the main host. This place is foul. More might be close." The wildling spat, staring at the charred remains. Alaric knelt to examine the aftermath. These wights were fresh, some wore the tatters of black cloaks or scraps of hide. They might have been members of the Lost Patrol. The look in their glazed eyes, that horrifying spark of eerie blue, renewed Alaric's hatred for the others. He rose, scanning the shadows. No White Walkers showed themselves here, but he felt their presence. They were building a scattered network of reanimated dead, harassing scouts and travelers to expand their numbers. He sent a runner to inform the main force, then soared ahead again, mind churning with the thought that this was only the beginning. If the Whites ambushed from multiple angles, if the White Walkers themselves ever confronted them in force, they could be pinned down in these frozen forests, far from reinforcements. The memory of the final battle years ago pressed at him, a crushing weight. The next encounters followed a similar pattern, pockets of Whites striking small groups or skulking around the edges of the column at night. Each time, Alaric or other watchful patrols discovered them in time to unleash dragonglass or flame. They lost a few men, but nowhere near the devastation that might have occurred if they'd been unprepared. Yet each skirmish told a story of how the White Walkers tested their defenses, wearing them down. On the 5th day, scouts reported a massing of undead deeper in the forest near a frozen lake. Alaric flew ahead at dawn with an advance party traveling on foot below. As the sun's pale rays slid through cloud cover, he saw it, a wide lake like a great sheet of ice, ringed by tall pines. Scores of wights gathered at the far shore, standing unnaturally still, as though waiting. In their midst, tall pale figures on dead horses moved among them. Alaric's blood went cold. White Walkers. At least 3, maybe more. He guided Ice Flame into a wide circle, heart-pounding. This was the largest concentration of undead they'd seen yet. If left unchecked, they could become a massive horde. Yet confronting them in open battle was risky. The White Walkers were cunning, and the lake's ice might hinder cavalry or foot soldiers. But the dragon could strike from above. Alaric signaled the ground forces, some 70 men led by a tall Glover Knight, along with wildlings under Gorn. They came up through the trees, dragging small sleds of dragonglass-tipped arrows and spears. Together, they observed the eerie congregation on the far shore. The White Walkers seemed aware of them, pale heads turning to track any movement. The air itself felt colder, as if a deep freeze emanated from that gathering. Alaric inhaled sharply, considering a direct assault. If he could incinerate the horde quickly, that might break the White Walkers' hold before they retreated. But the ice spears the others hurled years ago still haunted him. One well-thrown spear could wound or kill Ice Flame. He needed a plan to minimize that threat. After a brief council with Gorn and the Glover Knight, Alaric settled on a strategy. The archers would move around the lake's perimeter, finding vantage points among the trees, each equipped with dragonglass-tipped arrows. Once they opened fire, Alaric would dive in on Ice Flame, unleashing concentrated bursts of flame on the densest clusters of wights. If any White Walker revealed itself, they'd aim with arrows or spears. The rest of the men would hold in reserve, ready to ambush wights that fled into the forest. It was a plan that relied heavily on timing, but they had little choice. The alternative was letting the horde slip away to unite with more undead. The men fanned out, hearts hammering. Alaric launched from a clearing, climbing above the tree line until the lake spread out below him, the wights a dark, seething mass. He prayed to the old gods that this would work. In the crisp morning air, each breath felt like shards of ice in his lungs. A signal horn echoed. Arrows flickered from the trees, streaking toward the horde. Some shattered on the ice, but many found their targets, sinking into rotting flesh. Whites collapsed, limbs convulsing as the dragoglass disrupted the magic animating them. The entire horde jerked into motion, turning with sudden violence. A ripple of unnatural howls tore across the lake. White walkers raised their swords and the whites surged forward. Alaric's mouth went dry. This was it. He guided Ice Flame into a controlled dive. The dragon roared, jaws opening to release a torrent of flame that lit the shore in brilliant orange. Whites shrieked, staggering as the ice under them cracked from the heat. Some fell in thrashing heaps, consumed by fire. Steam billowed into the air. Archers kept firing from the flanks, picking off those that escaped the flames. Then came the spears of ice. Alaric saw them glinting like crystalline javelins hurled upward by the White Walkers. He urged Ice Flame to jink sideways. One spear missed them by a few yards, shattering in midair with a sound like thunder. Another zipped past on the other side, slicing a tuft of scales from the dragon's flank. Ice Flame roared in pain, but continued the attack. Alaric's heart slammed against his ribs. He had to be more careful. The horde was in disarray, many whites charred or riddled with arrows. Alaric circled for another pass. He glimpsed a White Walker standing atop a hummock of snow, sword raised. Its pale mare, a rotting beast, snorted freezing breath. A swirl of ice crystals formed around them. Alaric recognized the old magic that had once threatened to extinguish even dragonfire. His memory flashed with terror. But retreat was not an option. He brought Ice Flame in low, unleashing a narrower jet of flame directly at that White Walker. The creature slashed its blade upward, forming a shimmering barrier of frost that clashed with the dragon's fire in a violent eruption of steam. For a heartbeat, Alaric thought the creature might withstand the flames entirely. Then cracks spread across the ice barrier and the White Walker reeled. Chunks of its armor glowed red-hot from the heat. It screeched, a sound that made Alaric's vision swim with pain. Its horse disintegrated, collapsing in a hiss of superheated flesh. He felt a surge of hope. If they could push harder, it might shatter. But before he could circle back, a second White Walker emerged from the confusion, hurling an ice spear. It streaked upward. Alaric yanked on the reins. Ice Flame banked, but not enough. The spear slashed along the dragon's shoulder, opening a ragged gash. A roar of agony echoed across the lake. The beast staggered midair, nearly crashing onto the ice. Alaric's stomach lurched. He clung to the saddle, teeth clenched. "Steady," he cried, urging the dragon to stay aloft. Blood spattered, sizzling in the cold. Ice Flame, furious and wounded, responded with a deafening roar and a surge of powerful wing beats, lifting them higher. Another volley of arrows from the flanks hammered the whites, providing a moment of reprieve. Alaric risked a glance downward. Many whites lay in ruin. Some flailed on the ice, limbs burning or embedded with arrows. But enough remained to press the fight. The White Walkers, though battered, had not fallen. On the lakeshore, Gorn's wildlings and the Glover Knight's men emerged from the woods, unleashing a barrage of spears. A White Walker at the forefront took a direct hit from a dragonglass projectile. It shrieked, stumbling backward. Its entire torso cracked like a pane of ice. Then it shattered, pieces falling to the ground with a sound like breaking glass. A roar of triumph rose from the watchers, but it was short-lived. Another White Walker turned its head with inhuman grace and raised a hand. A swirl of frost coalesced, blasting the men in a wave of frigid air. A few collapsed, shuddering. Alaric gritted his teeth. He had to tip the scales. Pain flared through him at the sight of Ice Flame's bleeding shoulder, but they still had strength. He guided the dragon back into a dive, ignoring the throbbing terror that one more ice spear could kill them both. The men on the ground needed a decisive strike. This time, he aimed for the densest knot of whites, a cluster rallying around two White Walkers. Ice Flame unleashed a torrent of flame so intense that Alaric could feel the heat radiating back against his face. The ice underfoot cracked and melted in wide swaths, turning into slush that swallowed the undead. Steam filled the air in roiling clouds. Whites collapsed by the dozen. The two White Walkers reeled, staggering through the swirling vapors. Another arrow soared from the treeline, striking one through the chest. It hissed, turning to frosty shards. The second tried to retreat, skirting around the molten ice. Alaric saw a chance. He swooped lower, ignoring the pain in Ice Flame's wing, and seized the dragonglass spear from the saddle's sheath. Heart hammering, he leaned over and thrust the spear at the White Walker's back as he passed overhead. The tip struck true, plunging between its shoulder blades. The pale creature screeched, twisting with unnatural speed, but the damage was done. Darkness splintered across its form and it disintegrated into shards that scattered across the lake, vanishing into the steam. A stunned silence followed. Without the White Walker's guidance, the remaining whites collapsed to the ground. Most were already burning or pinned with arrows. By the time the steam began to clear, the battle was over. Alaric hovered in the air, panting, surveying a scene of devastation, the cracked ice, scorched corpses, shattered remains of White Walkers. Exhausted men stumbled across the shore, some cradling wounds, others finishing off twitching GHTS with dragonglass knives. He landed carefully on the firmer edge of the lake, adrenaline still pounding in his veins. A few men rushed forward to help him dismount and check Ice Flame's wounds. The dragon's shoulder bled badly, the scale plates parted by the ice spear's razor edge. Alaric's hands shook as he removed the harness. It would need immediate tending or infection might set in, especially in this frozen land. He looked around, heart-constricting. They had struck a devastating blow, destroying multiple White Walkers and countless whites. But at what cost? The Glover Knight limped over, helmet in hand, face speckled with ice. "My lord," he gasped. "That was something. Gods be praised." Alaric nodded faintly. "Casualties? We lost about 20 men. Wildlings lost a handful too. Many are wounded." He looked at Ice Flame's injury with concern. "And the dragon?" Alaric forced himself to speak levelly. "Wounded but alive. We need a safe spot to treat that spear wound. Gather the healers. We'll set up a makeshift camp in the woods beyond the lake. We can't stay here on the ice." Over the next few hours, men busied themselves clearing the battlefield. Dragonglass-tipped weapons were retrieved and any leftover whites were methodically burned. Archers gathered spent arrows. A hush hung over the victory, tempered by the knowledge that this was only one chunk of the undead presence. The White Walkers they had destroyed were formidable, but there could be more scattered across the north. Still, it was a triumph that might slow the threat, buy them time. Alaric knelt beside Ice Flame in the lee of the trees, while a pair of healers carefully cleaned the wound. The dragon lay still, trusting Alaric's calm voice. Blood sizzled on the snowy ground. Alaric stroked the scaled neck. "Easy," he murmured. "You did well, old friend. Rest now." Gorn, who had fought his way through a mob of whites, approached with a respectful nod. "That was a victory. A big one. I saw you spear that pale demon from the sky." He spat. "Good riddance." Alaric managed a thin smile. "We can't be sure how many remain, but it's progress. I'm grateful for your help." Gorn shrugged, but his eyes shone with a grudging respect. "You kneelers and your dragon fight well. We'll keep guiding you. Better to finish them off than let them pick us off one by one." Night fell with an uneasy calm. Alaric posted double guards around the perimeter. He tried to rest in a small tent near Ice Flame, but each time his eyes closed, he saw that hideous glare of a White Walker, felt the chill that seemed to seep into his very bones. The knowledge that they'd destroyed several gave him some measure of hope, yet he could not forget that the White Walkers had grown cunning. These might only be forward scouts for a deeper malevolence lurking in the far north. In the following days, they continued pushing deeper, using Gorn's free folk to scout. They engaged more pockets of whites, smaller groups that were swiftly dispatched, though with frequent casualties. The haunted forest lived up to its name, an endless tangle of dark trunks and snow-laden boughs where anything could lurk behind the next drift. More than once, men returned from patrol pale and shaking, saying they'd glimpsed pale figures slipping between the trees. The next dawn, the footprints would vanish as though the White Walkers deliberately harassed them without offering a pitched battle. Meanwhile, Alaric worried about Ice Flame. The wound from the ice spear had been carefully cleaned and bound with poultices, but the dragon's flight was hampered by pain. It couldn't climb as high or as fast as before. The region's cold only made the healing slower. Yet they pressed on, knowing that without the dragon's fire, they had no chance of systematically rooting out the undead. He tried to give the beast rest days, letting the men handle lesser threats on foot, but every large cluster of whites demanded a fiery assault. More than once, Alaric had to choose carefully which fights to join and which to delegate to the ground forces and their dragonglass. And then came the day when everything changed, when Alaric realized they might be on the brink of finishing the job or plunging into catastrophe. Scouts discovered a pass leading into a wide ravine nestled between two ridges of the Frostfangs. The free folk insisted that no one had inhabited it for years, not even wildlings, yet fresh tracks indicated large-scale movement. When Alaric and a group of rangers investigated, they found what looked like a network of ice caves and tunnels carved into the mountainside. A faint chill radiated from within, beyond even the normal cold. Tracks of bare feet littered the entrance along with a scattering of old bones. Alaric's heart pounded. If the White Walkers had chosen this ravine as a base, they might be gathering or animating fresh dead. This could be the heart of the threat, the place from which the next avalanche of terror would descend. If they struck now, perhaps they could catch the others unprepared, destroy them once and for all. Yet it was also a trap waiting to spring. His mind raced as he weighed the risks. The men were tired and battered from days of skirmishes. Iceflame was still wounded, though the dragon could fight in short bursts. Reinforcements from the south might arrive eventually, but who knew if the White Walkers would vanish by then? After huddling with Gorn and his officers, Alaric decided they had to try. A swift assault could save thousands of lives if it destroyed the others at their source. They would approach under cover of darkness, risky, but it might also hide them from the White Walkers' watchful eyes. Then, at dawn, they'd strike, using the full might of the dragon's flame at the entrance to flush the undead out. Archers stationed along the ridges would pepper any whites that emerged, while ground forces prepared to engage. If White Walkers attempted to flee, the men would give chase. It was a gamble, but waiting might only grant the enemy more time to regroup. Under a pale moon, they assembled quietly at the outskirts of the ravine. Snow muffled their footsteps. Alaric had Iceflame rest behind a rocky outcrop, hidden from direct view of the cave entrance. A hush lay over the land, broken only by the shifting of armor or the occasional nervous whisper. The men's breaths plumed white in the freezing air. Far above, the stars glittered coldly. Alaric paced, checking his gear, ensuring the dragonglass spear was within reach. He felt the tension of men on the cusp of possible doom. In the darkness, a haggard ranger told his companion that if they died here, at least it would be quick. Alaric offered a silent prayer that they would live to see the sun again. The hours until dawn crawled. Alaric tried to rest but ended up wide awake, mind replaying the strategy. Finally, faint light touched the eastern sky. A pink haze spread across jagged peaks. Alaric inhaled, steeling himself. He climbed atop Iceflame. The dragon, though tired, was coiled like a spring, as if sensing the final confrontation. With a nod to his captains, Alaric urged the beast into the air. They rose from behind the ridge, circling once. The men below readied bows, spears, and swords. A war horn sounded a low note, echoing off crags. Then the assault began. Iceflame swooped toward the mouth of the largest cave, flames spewing from its jaws. The searing heat struck ice and rock, sending steam billowing in thick clouds. The air hissed. Almost instantly, unearthly shrieks erupted from within. Whites staggered out, set aflame or badly scorched, collapsing under arrow fire. More poured forth, a ragged flood of undead that howled in mindless fury. From vantage points on the ridges, wildlings and northern archers loosed volley after volley of dragonglass-tipped arrows. The whites tumbled in droves, fracturing or shriveling as the magic was disrupted. Alaric guided Iceflame into a second pass, spewing a concentrated jet of flame into the cave entrance to seal it or flush out anything still inside. The entire mouth glowed red, chunks of ice crashing down. Yet from a side cavern, more whites spilled forth, clawing at the air. Among them strode a tall, gaunt figure with hair like white silk and eyes that glowed azure. A White Walker, carrying a spear of glittering ice. Alaric dived, prepared to incinerate it, but the creature hurled its spear with lightning speed. Alaric jerked aside, and the spear whistled past, missing the dragon's belly by mere feet. The White Walker vanished back into the cave's depths, apparently unscathed. On the ground, men charged forward, hacking at whites that tried to break through. The clash of steel, the moans of the undead, and the thunder of the dragon's wings filled the ravine with chaotic noise. Though outnumbered by the living, the whites fought savagely, ignoring mortal wounds. At times, it took a half-dozen men to bring one down if they lacked dragonglass. Archers on the ridges shouted warnings as more undead surged out from hidden crevices. The entire slope seemed riddled with tunnels. Alaric's heart hammered. It was as if they'd stirred a hornet's nest of the dead. Yet they had the advantage of sunlight, the unity of free folk and northerners, and the dragon's flame. If they persisted, maybe they could root every last White Walker out of these caves. He turned to circle back, letting Iceflame incinerate a knot of whites that threatened to overwhelm a group of men. In the swirl of fire and smoke, glimpses of blackened bodies convulsed, crumbling to ash. The battle wore on for what felt like hours. Each time the men drove the whites back, more emerged from side tunnels until gradually the flow slowed. A savage satisfaction spread among the living ranks as they realized the onslaught was thinning. But Alaric wasn't fooled. The White Walkers themselves had not shown in force. He suspected a final confrontation awaited deeper in the caves. At last, Gorn and a handful of wildlings sprinted to the cave entrance, wanting to push inside. Alaric landed outside, dismounting carefully. "Be careful," he warned. "If the White Walkers are in there, they can freeze us in a heartbeat. We should block the entrance and force them out." Gorn panted, face streaked with soot. "Tunnels are too vast, Stark. They could slip away. We have to corner them or we'll be fighting whites in these hills for the next decade." Alaric clenched his jaw. He knew Gorn was right. The ultimate victory would require going in. He patted Ice Flame's flank, hating the idea of leaving the dragon behind, yet the caves might be too cramped, too twisting for a beast of that size. "Have the men stand ready here," he said. "If we flush them out another way, they'll have to fight our lines. Meanwhile, I'll go in with a handful of volunteers, see if we can locate their heart." Gorn gave a terse nod. "I'm with you." Together, they gathered about 20 men, mostly experienced fighters who carried dragonglass spears or axes. They carried torches, though the flickering flames felt feeble in the gloom of that yawning cavern. Alaric handed off Ice Flame's reins to a stable hand, stroking the dragon's muzzle. "Stay," he whispered. "Burn anything that tries to come out behind us." The dragon rumbled as though offended by being left out. Alaric suppressed a pang of regret and followed Gorn into the darkness. The tunnel sloped downward, sides slick with melting ice. Their torches cast dancing shadows across curved walls. A faint hiss of dripping water echoed, punctuated by occasional distant shrieks. The stench of decay and cold magic made Alaric's scalp prickle. Step by careful step, they pressed on, wincing at each footfall that crunched over frost and scattered bones. They passed the corpses of a few whites, charred by earlier blasts of dragon fire that had reached this far, but the deeper tunnels branched in multiple directions unscathed by flame. A fork in the tunnel forced them to split. Gorn led half the men one way, Alaric took the other. The gloom felt suffocating. Alaric's group tread slowly, listening for any sign. Now and then they heard muffled fighting overhead. The friction of steel on bone, distant roars of flame, the echo of a collapsing tunnel. Then it would fall silent again, leaving only the faint drip of water from overhead stalactites. Finally, the passage opened into a domed chamber where the ice formed eerie pillars around the perimeter. A pale luminescence glowed from cracks in the walls as if capturing refracted daylight from above. Alaric motioned for the men to form a defensive circle. They stepped forward, torches flickering. At the far side of the chamber, a figure emerged, a White Walker. Its eyes burned with that familiar azure flame. It wore an armor of interlocking ice plates, and it held a long sword of frosted crystal. From behind it, 2 more White Walkers glided into view, silent and terrible. Alaric's men gasped, gripping their weapons. The tension in the air was electric. Alaric drew his dragon-glass dagger with one hand and hefted a short spear in the other. He recalled the old terror. The White Walkers' movements were inhumanly fast, and their aura of cold could freeze a man's breath in his throat. But they were not invincible. He had killed one before. One of the White Walkers raised its sword, pointing at Alaric. The temperature plummeted, a wave of frost rippling across the chamber floor. Men shouted in alarm as ice coated their boots. Another White Walker circled to the left, flickering out of sight behind a pillar. Alaric realized they were being enveloped. With a sharp cry, he urged his men forward. "Attack from both sides. Don't let them isolate you." The men surged, brandishing dragonglass spears. The first White Walker met them with a sweeping blow that shattered one spear, sending shards flying. But 2 more men stabbed from behind, scoring hits that left cracks in its icy form. It hissed, twisting with impossible grace, dispatching one soldier with a flick of its blade. The man collapsed, chest covered in frost. Another tried to slash with a dragonglass axe, but the White Walker darted away, sustaining only a shallow cut. Meanwhile, the second White Walker struck from behind a pillar, cutting down a guard before he could react. Alaric lunged at it with his spear. Their weapons clashed in a burst of sparks, frost against obsidian. He felt the bone-jarring impact reverberate up his arm. The creature's eyes shone with contempt. Alaric used the momentum of his spear to twist around, aiming to slice across its midsection. The White Walker parried, sliding back with supernatural fluidity, then countered with a vicious thrust. Alaric barely managed to raise his dragonglass dagger in time, deflecting the blow. Ice chips fell from the Walker's blade. Behind them, The third White Walker advanced, its sword trailing a line of hoarfrost along the floor. Two men rushed it, spears forward, but it moved faster than sight, disarming one with a single swipe and impaling the other on its icy blade. A ragged scream filled the chamber. In desperation, a survivor flung his torch at the White Walker's face. It recoiled, giving enough time for him to drive a dragonglass stake into its side. The creature hissed and cracked, staggering away. Alaric glimpsed the first White Walker pinned briefly by multiple spear wielders, but it unleashed a wave of cold that froze one man's arm solid. Another man toppled over, legs stiffening with frostbite. Sensing that the fight was turning brutal, Alaric gritted his teeth and pressed his attack on the second White Walker. He feinted low with his spear, then slashed upward with the dagger, catching it across the chest. The creature shrieked, shards splintering from its torso. He seized the moment, driving the spear in a hard thrust. Dragonglass pierced the walker's heart, and it erupted into a swirl of ice fragments, dissolving into the air. He spun around just in time to see the third White Walker smash aside one of his men's defenses, only to stagger as another soldier jammed a dragonglass spear into its spine. The walker cracked and disintegrated in a burst of shards. That left only the first White Walker, the one with the swirling frost aura. It had cut down half the men engaging it, stepping through them like a silent wraith. Now only two men remained standing in its path. Their breaths billowed in terrified gasps, and frost coated their armor. Alaric lunged to help, fear spiking in his chest at the carnage. One soldier tried to stab the walker's flank, twisted, kicking him aside. The other soldier advanced from behind, plunging his spear at the creature's ribs. But the walker spun in a blur, parrying with its sword. The spear shattered. A slash of the walker's blade cut the soldier's throat, leaving him to collapse in a spasm. Alaric roared in fury, leaping forward. He swiped with his spear, forcing the walker back. Their eyes locked. Its malevolent gaze promised death. Alaric recognized a dangerous cunning, as though it understood exactly who he was. The walker lunged, blade scything downward. Alaric parried with the spear's shaft, the impact splintering small fragments of dragonglass but holding. He twisted to bring the dagger up, aimed at the walker's face. The creature jerked aside, sending a brutal blast of cold at Alaric's torso. Agony sliced through him. It felt as though the marrow in his bones froze. He staggered, nearly dropping the dagger. The walker thrust again, aiming to end it. Summoning all his strength, Alaric pivoted at the last second, letting the blade glance off the spear's remains. He drove the dagger forward in a desperate strike. The tip stabbed into the walker's neck. For a moment, the creature stiffened, eyes wide. Then cracks spiraled across its form, accompanied by an unearthly moan that rattled the ice pillars. Alaric yanked the dagger free and staggered back as the walker exploded into a storm of frozen shards. He collapsed to one knee, gasping, ice crystals flaking off his cloak. Pain racked his limbs. All around the chamber, the few surviving men groaned or panted, checking each other for wounds. At least 3 lay dead. Another 2 clutched their limbs, suffering from freezing injuries. The air smelled of cold sweat and burned tallow from their spent torches. Alaric forced himself to stand. He walked among the wounded, helping where he could. "We did it," he croaked, voice hoarse. "All 3 are gone." The final White Walker's destruction meant that the whites it controlled were likely inert. Any that remained in these tunnels might fall without direction. This could be the end of the threat in this region. They emerged from the chamber to rejoin the men outside, finding the scene much quieter. The last pockets of whites had collapsed when the White Walkers died, leaving only corpses that disintegrated into crusted remains. Gorn appeared from another tunnel, face pale and bloody but triumphant. Together they surveyed the ravine. Smoke curled from collapsed tunnel mouths. Bodies of friend and foe littered the snow. It was a horrific sight, but also a sign that the others' foothold here had been shattered. Alaric blinked into the wan light. He spotted Iceflame perched near a rocky ledge, watchers gathered around. The dragon's wound looked to be clotted, though it still bled sluggishly. Alaric's heart lifted at the sight that his friend still stood. He stumbled forward, exhaustion threatening to topple him. The men parted as he approached, some clapping him on the shoulder, murmuring about the fierce fight inside the caves. He sank to his knees at the dragon's side, letting out a long, shuddering breath. They had done it, another stronghold of the White Walkers annihilated. News traveled swiftly among the battered force. Many found cause for relief, though the cost had been steep. Nearly a quarter of their fighters lay dead or wounded, and the rest were bruised, frostbitten, or simply numb with shock. Alaric recognized that they might still face scattered pockets of undead, but the destruction of these White Walkers removed a major threat. They had struck a decisive blow. In the following days, they combed the tunnels, burning any remains, collapsing passages. Some groups ranged further into the Frost Fangs, discovering only meager signs that a few whites had fled. They hunted them down relentlessly, dispatching them with dragaglass. Gradually, the dread that hung over the region began to lift. The survivors felt the stirrings of victory. Yet Alaric remained uneasy. The renewed invasion had been savage, yes, but it lacked the overwhelming scale of the last war. Some men believed they had cut off the threat at its source, finishing the job once and for all. Alaric wished he could be so certain. The others were ancient, their methods layered. Perhaps they had tried to regroup earlier than expected, only to be stopped by House Stark and its allies. Or perhaps they had deeper reserves hidden in uncharted wastes. Only time would tell if they'd truly averted another long night. He chose to send riders back south, bearing tidings of the victory to Winterfell. Meanwhile, he and the main body would remain a while longer, mopping up stray whites and assisting the free folk who'd been displaced. The Watchers at Castle Black reported that more reinforcements from the north were en route, along with a small contingent from the Riverlands. That news made Alaric grimace. He half expected Aemon Rivers to swoop in, boasting how they'd valiantly joined an already finished war. Still, their help, belated or not, might be needed if any pockets of the undead remained. Slowly, the men and wildlings made their way back toward the wall, carrying their wounded in sledges. Where once they had marched in fear, now they carried themselves with battered pride, having faced and destroyed White Walkers in their icy lair. Alaric rode carefully beside the column, Iceflame walking on foot rather than flying, to spare its injured wing. The journey was punctuated by moments of silent reflection. Many had lost close friends in the caves. When they finally emerged from the haunted forest, the sight of the wall looming overhead was almost comforting. Night's Watch sentries recognized the returning force and opened the gates, exclaiming with relief at the news that multiple White Walkers were slain. Commander Welk greeted Alaric with open arms. "The gods were with you," he murmured, scanning the ragged lines of survivors. "You've done the impossible once again." Alaric accepted a waterskin from a ranger, parched from the long march. "We did what we had to. Let's hope it was enough." A few days later, a small procession bearing the sigil of House Justman arrived at Castle Black, some 100 Riverlanders, accompanied by Aemon Rivers himself. They found the exhausted victors already resting, tents dotting the courtyard. Alaric watched the newcomers dismount from behind a line of watchmen, his expression unreadable. Aemon, wearing a heavy cloak, approached with a mixture of curiosity and surprise. "Lord Alaric, so it's true," he said, glancing around at the battered men, "the wounded dragon. We rode north as swiftly as we could after receiving word, but it appears you've already struck a crippling blow against the threat." Alaric's voice was level. "Yes. We found a nest of White Walkers in the Frost Fangs and destroyed them. There may be scattered remains, but the immediate danger is contained." Aemon nodded slowly, his eyes drifting to the bandage on Iceflame's shoulder, then the worn faces of Alaric's soldiers. "I see you've paid dearly." "We did." Alaric studied the envoy, unsure what to expect. "Your men can help patrol the area if you wish. The watch can always use more swords. If there are any pockets left, they might appear at the fringes." "Of course." Aemon offered a bow that was almost sincere. "House Justman stands ready. We come in good faith, and if there is still need, let us share the burden." Alaric inclined his head. Perhaps this was a genuine gesture, or perhaps they sought to secure goodwill now that the crisis seemed mostly resolved. Either way, more swords were not unwelcome. That afternoon, the Riverlander contingent integrated with the watchmen for joint patrols along the wall's perimeter. Alaric found a moment to rest, sitting on a bench with a blanket over his shoulders. The cold burned in his lungs, and the residual ache of the White Walker's frost magic still throbbed in his limbs. Desmond arrived 2 days later, bringing fresh supplies from Winterfell. He practically flung himself off his horse upon seeing Alaric. "You mad fool," he said, voice trembling. "We heard about the caves, about how you nearly got yourself killed again." Alaric managed a shaky smile as Desmond embraced him. "I'm alive, and we ended them, at least the group in the Frost Fangs. Are there more rumors of trouble anywhere else?" Desmond shook his head. "No. People whisper that you saved the North again." No whites have appeared south of the wall aside from a few stray sightings that turned out to be false alarms. It seems you truly crushed the threat. Alaric exhaled slowly, relief mingling with lingering doubt. Then maybe this time we ended it before it could grow. Commander Welk and Gorn both insisted that some watchful presence remain in the far north for a while, scouts to roam and confirm no other pockets of White Walkers or whites lurked. Alaric volunteered to keep some of his men there for the short term, though most longed to return home. The free folk, having seen the threat beaten back, eyed the kneelers with a bit less hostility. Some even murmured thanks to Alaric for preventing a second wave of annihilation. Gorn, solemn but satisfied, parted from the main force with a curt nod, leading his warriors back to their scattered camps. "We'll keep an eye out," he said. "If any more pale fiends show their faces, we'll let you know." Before leaving Castle Black, Alaric did one final patrol north of the wall on Iceflame, wings still healing but serviceable for shorter flights. He saw only empty forests, silent valleys. The sense of looming doom had ebbed, replaced by the stark beauty of a land unclaimed by men or the undead. Snow glittered in the pale sunlight, the wind keened along ridges, and not a single white prowled below. For now, at least, the others were beaten back into the shadows. He returned to Castle Black, packed his gear, and mustered the men for the march south. As they approached the gate, Commander Welk saluted, cane in one hand. "We owe you everything once more, Alaric Stark. May the realm never forget." Alaric bowed his head. "We all did our part. The watch stands for us all. Take care, Lord Commander." And so they marched homeward, battered but unbroken. The journey felt brighter than the northward trek, as if the land itself recognized some measure of peace. Small storms blew in, dusting the group with fresh snow, but they found solace in the knowledge that no horde of undead lurked in the white expanses. Alaric took his time, letting the wounded rest, ensuring Iceflame's injury was regularly cleaned. He forced himself to accept that his own ache, where the White Walker's frost had gnawed him, might linger for weeks or months. The price of victory. When they finally reached Winterfell, townsfolk and guards rushed out to greet them. Joy mingled with sorrow for the men who would not return. Cregan stood on the steps of the keep, face tear-streaked with relief. As Alaric dismounted from a horse, he chose to keep Iceflame in the air for space. His father embraced him fiercely, ignoring the stares of onlookers. "My boy," Cregan murmured, voice shaking. "Thank the gods you've come back. We heard the news, but I dared not believe it until I saw you." Alaric held his father close. "We did it again. A smaller threat, but still deadly. We lost men, but we destroyed them before they could spread." Cregan pulled back, nodding. "You've done the North proud, Alaric. Perhaps now we can finally know peace." News of the victory spread throughout the castle. Servants bustled about, preparing a feast to honor the returning soldiers. The great hall filled with warm light, and though the mood was tempered by the memory of the fallen, it was nonetheless celebratory. Veterans who had gone beyond the wall shared harrowing tales with wide-eyed younger folk, describing how White Walkers shattered under dragonglass and how the dragon's flame lit the sky with an orange glow. Some men hoisted cups in memory of the dead, toasting their sacrifice. Alaric drifted among them, accepting thanks with humility, never letting the praise go to his head. Aemon Rivers and his Riverlanders also appeared, congratulating Alaric on his success. "I regret we could not arrive sooner," Aemon said, wearing an almost apologetic smile. "But if there is anything we can still do, you have only to name it." Perhaps he hoped to reintroduce talk of alliances under a friendlier light. But Alaric only thanked him and deferred to a later time, focusing on the immediate necessity of caring for the wounded and burying the dead. That evening, after the feasting had wound down and the fires in the great hall turned low, Alaric slipped away to the godwood. Snow coated the branches of the ancient trees, and the weirwood's red leaves rustled faintly in a gentle wind. Iceflame, freed from harness, perched along the outer courtyard, too large to fit among the tight cluster of oaks and evergreens. Alaric felt the beast's presence as a comforting warmth behind him. He knelt by the weirwood's gnarled trunk, gazing up at the carved face. The red sap tears seemed to watch him. In a low voice, he spoke his thanks and his sorrow. He prayed for the souls lost in the frost fangs, for the men frozen by the White Walker's blades, for the families who would never see their loved ones again. He prayed that the others might finally remain dormant, giving the realm a chance to heal. A hand rested gently on his shoulder, and he turned to see Desmond. His friend's expression was solemn. "I guessed you'd be here. It's where you always come when you're torn between relief and grief." Alaric stood, exhaling slowly. "I just keep wondering if the threat will ever truly end. If they keep returning, each time earlier than we expect." Desmond nodded. "They've been around since the dawn of days, if the stories are true. But each time they rise, men like you stand against them. The North endures." "I'm tired of it," Alaric whispered. "I'd rather spend my days helping the small folk flourish, not constantly looking over my shoulder for the dead. But I know it's my fate. The dragon's tamer. The realm's shield." Desmond smiled faintly, clasping Alaric's arm. "You have helped, my lord. You're not alone, even if you bear the greatest burden. And for now, you've bought us peace. That's worth celebrating." Alaric returned the smile, feeling tears prick his eyes. He was grateful for Desmond's loyalty, for his father's pride, for the men and women who fought bravely in the savage cold. Together, they had driven back the night once more. They left the godwood, stepping into the courtyard where Ice Flame waited. The dragon raised its head, golden eyes reflecting the torchlight. Alaric ran a hand over the beast's flank near the bandaged wound. It huffed, leaning into his touch. That intangible bond pulsed between them, a quiet understanding that they both carried scars from these wars. They had triumphed again, and if the day came when the others rose anew, they would try again. Their story was not over. In the weeks that followed, official messages confirmed that no further sightings of the undead plagued the north. The free folk settled back into their camps, the Night's Watch resumed standard patrols, and the lords who had mustered volunteers returned home with pride. A new wave of relief buoyed the small folk who heard that House Stark's dragon had once again saved the realm from a frozen doom. The scars of the conflict remained. Funeral pyres for the fallen, families mourning losses, men nursing injuries. But this time, the realm had not suffered a catastrophic war that ravaged entire regions. They had moved swiftly, and that swiftness had prevented a second-long night. Now, new challenges rose to the forefront: the question of House Justman's alliance, the lingering presence of Riverlander soldiers at Moat Cailin and along the Neck. Lord Cregan and Alaric found themselves in council more often than not, weighing the complexities of southern politics. On the surface, the Riverlanders offered friendship, trade, and mutual defense. But Alaric suspected that their king would eventually demand the ultimate guarantee, the promise of the dragon's fire if war ever threatened the Trident. He wrestled with the moral implications. Did he have the right to take Iceflame into foreign wars? Or would that risk turning the beast and House Stark into some southern pawn? Cregan, growing older and more frail, left much of the decision-making to Alaric. "You've proven yourself a leader thrice over," the old lord said one evening by the hearth, sipping hot cider. "Between forging a bond with a dragon, saving the realm from the dead not once but twice, and uniting the North behind you, no one questions your authority. Not even me." Alaric felt a pang of bittersweet emotion. He thought of the boy he'd been, overshadowed by older siblings, enthralled by old manuscripts in the Winterfell library. Fate had shaped him into a figure of legend. Sometimes he longed for simpler days, but there was no going back. "We'll keep the negotiations slow," he said, "until we fully understand King Bernard's motives. We can't promise him the dragon, not for any petty feud. If a threat as grave as the others emerges, we might help. But that's it." Cregan nodded, lips curving in a faint smile. "You've grown wise, Alaric. Many would be drunk on power after such feats. But you hold fast to your principles. That humility will keep the North strong." Alaric thought of the weirwood, of the swirling snow beyond the wall, of the men who fought by his side. "It's not humility so much as necessity," he replied. "A dragon is a gift and a curse if misused. We've seen enough ruin." His father patted his hand. "We'll handle the Southerners in due time. For now, rest. You've earned it." Alaric tried. But true rest eluded him. Each night, he climbed the stairs to his tower or took a walk through the courtyard, nodding to the watchman who stood guard. When he felt the cold nip at his face, he remembered the frigid blasts of White Walker magic. Sometimes he started awake, dreaming of that monstrous glare in the gloom of the caves, the crack of ice underfoot. Yet always, in these moments, he found solace in Iceflame's presence or in the knowledge that the men he led survived by his side. Winter lingered as it always did in the north, yet the dead no longer roamed. The free folk were not beating at the wall's gates in terror. The lords of the north turned to more mundane tasks, harvests, settling local disputes, forging trade deals with the south. Life went on with an undercurrent of uneasy gratitude. The small folk spoke Alaric's name in reverent tones, calling him the Dragon of Winterfell or the Savior of the North. Children played at being Alaric and the White Walkers, brandishing sticks as swords. Minstrels sang ballads of the Second Great Victory, weaving myth and truth together until no one quite remembered how a quiet, scholarly Stark boy had once discovered a hidden dragon. Months passed, and House Justman's envoys politely pressed for more formal ties. Alaric and Cregan maintained a cautious stance, forging a limited trade treaty but refusing to commit the dragon to any war south of the Neck. Aemon Rivers, seeing that neither threats nor enticements moved the Starks, settled for an uneasy friendship. He departed Winterfell in early spring with a small retinue, leaving behind a letter from King Bernard that spoke of admiration and hope for future unity. Alaric folded that letter away, uncertain if the day would come when the Riverlands demanded more than words. As the seasons turned, Ice Flame's wound finally healed into another scar. Alaric rode the dragon on patrol across the north, ensuring the watchers at Eastwatch and Castle Black saw a friendly shape in the sky. Sometimes he circled over the Frostfangs, remembering the desperate struggle in those caves. They were empty now, collapsed or sealed. He glimpsed wildlings living in scattered huts, often waving or beating drums in cautious acknowledgement of the winged visitor. Each flight reminded him of the tenuous peace they enjoyed. And so time flowed on, bringing a new sense of normalcy. Some older knights whispered that the realm was on borrowed time, that the others always returned eventually. Younger folk laughed, believing the legends vanquished. Alaric found himself occupying a middle ground, vigilant but not consumed by fear. He attended to the daily responsibilities of lordship, hearing petitions, ensuring the roads were safe from bandits, monitoring trade. He weighed the possibility of forging alliances through marriage, but no arrangement satisfied him. He had no desire to chain himself to a stranger merely to secure a political advantage. Perhaps in time he would choose another path, but for now the burdens of leadership were enough. He spent hours in the library again, studying the oldest scrolls about the Age of Heroes, gleaning any insight about the deep magic that might spawn the White Walkers or dragons. The more he learned, the more he realized that these ancient forces were cyclical, shaped by a world older than men's kingdoms. The best he could do was remain steadfast, passing on knowledge to future generations, ensuring they kept watch. The doom of complacency was the realm's greatest enemy. One day, a traveling bard sang in Winterfell's hall, telling the children a story of the fierce boy who discovered a secret valley, tamed a dragon, and saved the north from the walking dead twice. Alaric listened from the back of the hall, half hidden among the crowd. The tale was embellished, full of dramatic flourishes that made him blush. In the bard's version, Alaric stood 10 feet tall, and Ice Flame breathed lightning as well as fire. But the children were wide-eyed with wonder, clapping their hands in delight, and the older folk smiled at the mention of that day the dead fell. Alaric realized this was how legends were born, how they would persist long after any single life was done. Perhaps that was fitting. He slipped away before the bard finished. Passing through the courtyard, he found Ice Flame in its favorite sun-dappled corner, half dozing. The dragon raised its head at his approach, letting out a questioning grunt. Alaric patted its scales. "They sing songs about us," he whispered with a slight smile. "They say we're heroes." Ice Flame blinked, then closed its eyes again with a rumble that might have been a snort. Alaric chuckled softly, suspecting that if the dragon could speak, it might scoff at the notion of men's stories. They had endured the harshest trials of ice and fire. That in the end was all that truly mattered. Overhead, the northern sky stretched boundless and cold. A breeze rustled the banners on Winterfell's walls. There was no telling how many more cycles of war and rebirth the real M would face, but for the moment peace held. He, Ice Flame, and the North had stood together against the darkness, and if that darkness rose again, they would rise to meet it. Days became weeks, weeks became months. The immediate crisis faded into memory, overshadowed by everyday tasks and the slow, patient rhythms of the North. Lord Cregan, sensing his own mortality, began quietly passing more responsibilities to Alaric, who carried them without complaint. The realm recognized Alaric as the practical power of House Stark. Envoys came from distant corners of Westeros, bearing timid greetings or curious proposals. Some simply wanted to glimpse the famed dragon. Few were granted the privilege. And still, in the hush of the godswood, Alaric found time to reflect on all that had transpired. How in his youth he had discovered that impossible warm veil, forging a bond no one believed possible. How he had twice defended the North from the horrors that dwelled in the cold dark of the far North. How each victory had come at a steep price in blood and sorrow. Yet life persisted, families grew, children laughed in the courtyards, and houses rebuilt. There was a grace in that endurance, a quiet triumph. Sometimes, as dusk settled over Winterfell, he took flight on Ice Flame, soaring above the castle, letting the wind whip his hair. The sun would dip below the horizon, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink. Below him, men and women paused in the yards or on the walls, gazing upward at the silhouette of dragon and rider. Some might have murmured prayers to the old gods, others might have simply stared in awe. Alaric would feel the dragon's warmth beneath him, sense the living furnace in its lungs. He and Ice Flame were two parts of a single legend, guardians forged in the crucible of adversity. They could not be separated from the fate of the North any more than winter could be stopped from coming. He would spiral higher, watching the wide fields and distant forests, scanning for threats or signs of trouble. Usually he saw nothing but the vastness of the land he loved. Then, satisfied, he and the dragon would drift downward, returning to the castle with a thunderous rush of wings. Guards would shield their eyes from swirling snow. Stable boys, still uneasy but full of pride, would hurry to remove the harness and offer the beast chunks of meat. Alaric would dismount, feeling that peculiar mingling of relief and longing that always followed a flight. This was his life now, a dance between sky and stone, between duty and wonder. In the end, no one could say how long the peace would last. But for Alaric Stark, that question mattered less than his choice to stand ever vigilant. If the others dared rise again, he would gather the North and face them once more, bringing fire to meet the encroaching cold. If Southern ambitions threatened House Stark's autonomy, he would parley or fight as needed, careful not to misuse the dragon's power. If new mysteries emerged from the darkest corners of the world, he would adapt, just as he had done before. Because he was the boy who, long ago, tamed a dragon in the Age of Heroes, and he had proven that the North was no mere afterthought in the tapestry of Westeros. It was a land as fierce and unbreakable as the winter winds that shaped it. Down to a beast of living flame, Alaric embodied a lesson that sometimes hope rose from the unlikeliest of sources, shining bright enough to banish even the shadows of an endless night. And so his story and the North story continued. Far beyond the gates of Winterfell and the memory of the last war, beyond the hush of ancient forests and the chilling hush of the far north, men whispered of the Stark who rode a dragon. They told of how, when winter returned in darkest form, he met it on equal terms, forging an alliance of ice and fire that saved them all. Some claimed it was myth, that no mortal could stand against the White Walkers twice. Others swore they had seen the dragon's flame with their own eyes. In the end, it hardly mattered. The legend lived, and in that legend lay a quiet promise that no matter how bitter the winds of winter grew, the spark of defiance in the human heart and the fierce loyalty of a dragon bound to that heart would always shine, ready to rise into the sky whenever darkness threatened once again.